The blood of 100 men stained the battlefield crimson. Bodies of fallen warriors lay scattered across the valley floor like discarded chess pieces. High above on the granite overlook, Alpha King Alexander Ravenwood surveyed what remained of the eastern rebel forces with eyes the color of burnished gold. His massive black wolf form cast a long shadow in the dying light of dusk, his fur matted with the evidence of battle, but his posture unbowed, unbroken. Victory belonged to the kingdom of Lunarfall once again. The last stand of the Silver Fang Rebellion had ended precisely as Alexander had planned, with their forces divided by the river, their supply lines severed, and their leadership decapitated. 20 years of strategic warfare had taught the Alpha King that battles were won long before the first sword was drawn. Alexander lifted his muzzle to the wind and released a howl that echoed across the valley, the signal of triumph that his warriors had been waiting for.
The answering chorus rose from 1,000 throats, the collective voice of the most powerful werewolf army the 12 territories had ever known. In the midst of their celebration, none noticed the slight tremor that passed through their king's massive form. None saw the momentary faltering in those golden eyes. None but General Marcus Blackthorne, Alexander's second-in-command for 15 years, who stood watchfully at his flank. "My king?" Blackthorne's gravelly voice carried a note of concern. Alexander did not acknowledge the question. Instead, he shifted back into his human form in a ripple of magic that smelled of pine and winter frost. He stood tall in his battle-worn armor, his raven-black hair swept back from a face carved by time and war into something both handsome and terrible. At 45, Alexander Ravenwood was a man in his prime, a werewolf alpha at the height of his power. Or so it had been until 3 moons ago. "Gather the commanders," Alexander ordered, his voice betraying none of the strangeness he felt building inside his chest. "We return to the capital by nightfall." "As you command." Blackthorne bowed his head, but his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing of the subtle rigidity in his king's posture. Alexander turned away from the battlefield and took 5 measured steps toward his waiting warhorse before the first spasm hit. A white-hot lance of pain drove through his chest, spreading outward like molten metal into his limbs. He staggered, but caught himself before falling. Inside his mind, a terrible silence spread where once the presence of his wolf had been, a void, a nothingness that terrified him more than any enemy ever had. "My king!" Blackthorne was at his side instantly, a strong arm supporting his suddenly leaden frame. Alexander opened his mouth to issue a command, but only blood spilled past his lips. The world tilted at a sickening angle as his knees buckled beneath him. The last thing he heard before consciousness fled was the panicked shouting of his men, and deeper still, a faint whimper from his wolf, a sound so weak and distant it might have been imagined. Darkness claimed the Alpha King of Lunarfall on the day of his greatest victory. 400 miles away, in the ancient capital of Wolfhaven, the Council of 7 Elders felt the disturbance in the pack bonds that connected all werewolves to their king. Candles guttered in the circular chamber as 7 pairs of ancient eyes snapped open in alarm. The stone beneath their feet trembled as if the mountain itself recognized that something fundamental had shifted in the world. "It has begun," Elder Gaia whispered, her withered fingers tightening around her ashwood staff. "The blood moon prophecy awakens." Elder Ironheart, once the most formidable warrior of his generation before time claimed his strength, leaned forward in his stone seat. "We have prepared for this day for 3 generations." "Not enough," Elder White Oak countered, her blind eyes staring at nothing and everything. "The king's wolf falls silent, while enemy forces still gather beyond our borders. The alliance of northern packs will see this as weakness." "Then we must give them strength," said Elder Moonwillow, the youngest of the 7 at merely 93 years. "The old magic, the binding." A heavy silence fell over the council chamber. What Moonwillow suggested had not been attempted in over 2 centuries. The risks were enormous, the consequences potentially catastrophic. "The Silverstone girl," Elder Gaia said finally. "She is of age now." "Lyra Silverstone?" Elder Ironheart's bushy eyebrows rose. The wolfless Omega, daughter of the disgraced general? The very same. Her bloodline carries the ancient magic. She may be our only hope.
A hollow vessel, Elder White Oak murmured, for a dying flame. The Council of Seven Elders deliberated through the night as messengers brought increasingly disturbing reports from the Eastern Front. King Alexander Ravenwood, the undefeated Alpha of Lunarfall, had collapsed after battle. His wolf had gone silent. The royal physicians were baffled. Ancient texts were consulted, forgotten rituals examined, desperate measures considered. By dawn, their decision was made. A royal decree was issued with the impression of 7 ancient seals pressed into blood-red wax. The wolfless Omega Lyra Silverstone would wed the dying Alpha King at the next full moon. The kingdom would have its sacrifice. In the lowest quarter of Wolfhaven, far from the towering spires of the royal palace, Lyra Silverstone awoke with a gasp. Sweat plastered her nightgown to her skin, despite the autumn chill that permeated the small bedroom she shared with her aunt. The dream clung to her like cobwebs. Blood and moonlight, a crown of thorns, a wolf with eyes like liquid gold calling her name from across an impossible distance. Lyra pressed trembling hands to her face. These dreams had been coming more frequently of late, each more vivid than the last. At 18, she was accustomed to being different, an Omega without a wolf, a curiosity, an object of pity or scorn depending on who was looking. But these dreams were new, and they frightened her in ways she couldn't articulate. Careful not to wake her aunt, Lyra slipped from her narrow bed and padded to the window. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten with the promise of dawn. In the distance, the royal palace of Wolfhaven loomed against the mountainside, its ancient stone the color of bone in the half-light. Her father had once walked those halls as the king's most trusted general, before his disgrace, before his death, before her mother had followed him to the grave, leaving Lyra alone but for her father's sister, who had taken in her brother's wolfless child, despite the whispers that followed them both. A sharp rap at the front door shattered the morning quiet. Lyra froze, listening to her aunt's footsteps crossing the worn floorboards of their modest home. Voices murmured in the entryway, her aunt's sleep-roughened tone and another unfamiliar one that carried the crisp authority of the palace. "Lyra!" Her aunt's voice held an edge of panic Lyra had never heard before. "Come quickly!" Heart pounding, Lyra grabbed her robe and hurried into the main room. A royal messenger stood just inside the doorway, resplendent in the black and silver livery of the king's personal guard. In his gloved hands, he held a scroll bearing the unmistakable seal of the Council of Seven. "Lyra Silverstone?" the messenger asked, though it was clear from his expression that he already knew who she was. "Yes," she answered, suddenly conscious of her bare feet on the cold floor, her uncombed hair, the shabby furnishings of the home that had sheltered her since her parents' deaths. "By decree of the Council of Seven, acting in the name of Alpha King Alexander Ravenwood, you are summoned to the palace immediately." He extended the scroll toward her with a slight bow. "You have been chosen as the royal bride. The wedding will take place in 3 days' time, at the full moon." The world seemed to tilt beneath Lyra's feet. She heard her aunt's sharp intake of breath, saw the messenger's impassive face, felt the weight of the scroll as it was pressed into her numb fingers, but none of it seemed real. "There must be some mistake," she managed. "I am wolfless, an Omega. The king would never—" "There is no mistake, Miss Silverstone." The messenger's voice softened fractionally. "The council has chosen you specifically because of your unique nature. A carriage awaits outside to take you to the palace, where the royal household will prepare you for the ceremony. You may bring one small bag of personal belongings." Her aunt found her voice at last. "This is absurd. She's just a girl. What does the council want with her?" The messenger's eyes flicked briefly to the older woman. "I am not privy to the council's deliberations, madam. I am merely the bearer of their decree." He turned back to Lyra. "You have 1 hour to prepare yourself, Miss Silverstone. I will wait outside."
With a formal bow, he retreated, closing the door behind him with a quiet finality that echoed in Lyra's bones. "Aunt Eliza," Lyra whispered, the scroll clutched in trembling fingers. "What does this mean?" Her aunt's face had gone the color of old parchment. "It means the rumors are true. The king is dying." The journey to the palace passed in a blur. Lyra sat rigid in the plush carriage, her few possessions packed in a small cloth bag beside her, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. Why her? What did the council want with a wolfless Omega? And what awaited her in the palace of a dying king? The answers began to take shape that same afternoon in the private chambers of Elder Gaia. The ancient werewolf sat across from Lyra, her eyes as old as the mountains and twice as unyielding. Between them, a small fire burned in a brazier of hammered silver, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with books older than the kingdom itself. "Your mother never told you about your bloodline, did she?" Elder Gaia asked, studying Lyra with unnerving intensity. Lyra shook her head. "She died when I was 8. There was little time for such conversations." "A pity. It would have prepared you for this moment." Elder Gaia sighed, the sound like autumn leaves rustling. "The Silverstone line is one of the oldest in Lunarfall. Before the Great Unification, before the 12 territories became one kingdom, your ancestors were not warriors like your father, but something far more valuable. They were vessels." Vessels? The word felt strange on Lyra's tongue. Conduits for the old magic. In the ancient times, when the first werewolves made their pacts with the moon spirits, certain bloodlines were blessed, or cursed depending on one's perspective, with the ability to channel magical energies that would destroy ordinary werewolves. Elder Gaia's gnarled fingers traced patterns in the air above the brazier, and the flames shifted in response, forming shapes that made Lyra's eyes water. "Your inability to shift, your wolfless state, these are not weaknesses, child. They are signs that your body is meant to contain something other than a wolf spirit." Lyra stared at the ancient werewolf, disbelief warring with a strange sense of recognition. "What does this have to do with the king?" "Everything." Elder Gaia leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper, though they were alone in the chamber. "King Alexander has been struck by an ancient curse, a sickness that is devouring his wolf from within. Our best healers have tried and failed to cure him. He weakens by the day, and with him the magical bonds that hold our kingdom together." "And you think I can help him? How?" "The blood moon ritual." Elder Gaia's eyes gleamed in the firelight. An ancient ceremony performed only in the most desperate times. It will bind your life force to his, creating a channel through which his wolf may find strength and shelter. Your empty vessel will become his wolf's sanctuary until the curse can be broken. Cold dread pooled in Lyra's stomach. And if the curse cannot be broken? Elder Gaia held her gaze without flinching. "Then you will both perish. But the kingdom will have time to prepare for the transition of power, rather than falling into chaos at the sudden death of our alpha." Lyra sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb the enormity of what was being asked of her. She was to be a sacrifice, a temporary vessel, a stopgap measure to prevent the collapse of a kingdom. "Do I have a choice?" she asked finally, already knowing the answer. "We all have choices, child." Elder Gaia's voice was not unkind. "But some choices carry the weight of thousands of lives. Your father understood this when he rode into battle for his king. Now it falls to you to serve in your own way." The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Lyra was installed in lavish chambers in the eastern wing of the palace, attended by a small army of servants who bathed her in water scented with rare herbs, dressed her in silks finer than anything she had ever touched, and instructed her in the complex protocols of royal life. Through it all, she felt like a spectator watching someone else's life unfold, someone who bore her face but whose destiny had been claimed by forces beyond her control. On the night before the wedding, Lyra stood on the balcony of her temporary chambers, gazing out at the full moon that hung heavy and swollen in the night sky. Tomorrow, beneath that same moon, she would be bound to a king she had never met, a dying alpha whose wolf would take shelter in the empty spaces where her own wolf should have been. A soft knock at her chamber door broke her reverie. Expecting another servant with yet more instructions for the ceremony, she called out permission to enter without turning from the view. "The moon suits you," said a voice that was definitely not a servant's, a deep baritone, rough around the edges like stone worn smooth by water. Lyra whirled around, her heart leaping into her throat. In the doorway stood a man she had seen only in royal portraits and at a distance during state processions. Tall and broad-shouldered, with raven-black hair now streaked with silver at the temples, King Alexander Ravenwood was an imposing figure, even in simple attire. But it was his eyes that caught and held her, not the molten gold of an alpha wolf in his prime, but a dull gray, like ashes after a fire has died. "Your Majesty!" Lyra gasped, dropping into a hasty curtsy. "I didn't expect—" "Clearly." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before vanishing. "Forgive the intrusion. I wanted to see you before tomorrow's spectacle." He moved into the room with a grace that belied his weakened condition, though Lyra noticed the subtle stiffness in his movements, the careful way he measured each step. This was a man accustomed to conserving his strength, to hiding his pain from those who might perceive it as weakness. "Why?" Lyra asked, then immediately regretted the bluntness of the question. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect." No forgiveness needed for honesty. Alexander crossed to the balcony where she stood, keeping a respectful distance. Up close, she could see the toll the curse had taken, the hollows beneath his cheekbones, the fine lines of strain around his mouth, the pallor beneath his sun-darkened skin. "I wanted to see the woman the council has chosen as my bride, the woman who will bear the burden of my affliction." "I wasn't given much choice in the matter," Lyra admitted, then bit her lip. She hadn't meant to sound bitter. To her surprise, Alexander laughed, a short, rusty sound, as if the mechanism for mirth had grown disused. "Nor was I. It seems we are both pawns in this game." He turned to look out at the moon, and Lyra studied his profile, the strong jaw, the proud nose, the set of his shoulders that spoke of a lifetime of command. This was a man born to rule, a wolf born to lead. The thought of such strength being slowly devoured from within made something twist painfully in her chest. "They told you what will happen?" he asked, still gazing at the moon. "The blood moon ritual. Your wolf will take shelter in me until the curse can be broken." He nodded slowly. "That is the official version. The more likely outcome is that my wolf and I will both perish, but more slowly, buying time for the succession to be managed without civil war." He turned to face her fully. "My wolf is dying, Lyra Silverstone, and when a wolf dies, it does not go quietly. The pain you will feel through our bond will be substantial." Lyra swallowed hard against the fear that rose in her throat. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve the truth, not the pretty lies the council has no doubt fed you." Alexander's gaze was steady, unflinching. "And because I want to give you the choice they did not. If you wish to leave, to flee the palace tonight, I will ensure your safe passage beyond the kingdom's borders. The council would be furious, but they would find another solution, another vessel." Lyra stared at him, stunned by the unexpected offer. Freedom dangled before her like a precious jewel, tempting in its brilliance. She could escape this fate, this binding to a dying king, this pain that awaited her. And yet, "Why would you offer this?" she asked softly. "After what it would cost you." A shadow passed over Alexander's face. "Because I have sent enough young people to their deaths in service to this crown. Because your father was a good man who deserved better than the disgrace that was heaped upon him. Because forcing you into this bond against your will would make me no better than the enemies I've spent my life fighting." At the mention of her father, Lyra's breath caught. "You knew my father?" "General Silverstone was one of my most trusted commanders for 15 years. A genuine sorrow touched Alexander's eyes. His disgrace was a political necessity, not a reflection of his true service to the crown. He died believing his sacrifice would protect you and your mother.
I failed him in that." The revelation struck Lyra like a physical blow. All these years, she had lived with her father's disgrace like a shadow over her life, never knowing there might be more to the story. "What really happened to him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's expression grew guarded. "That is a conversation for another time, if there is another time." He stepped back from the balcony. "Think on my offer, Lyra Silverstone. If you wish to leave, place a red rose outside your door before midnight. I will send someone to guide you to safety." He turned to go, moving with that careful precision that spoke of constant pain carefully managed. At the door he paused, looking back at her with those ash-gray eyes that had once blazed gold. "Whatever you decide," he said quietly, "know that I will honor it." Then he was gone, leaving Lyra alone with the moon and a decision that would shape not only her fate, but the future of a kingdom. No red rose adorned Lyra's door that night. The great hall of Wolfhaven Palace had been transformed for the blood moon ritual. Ancient tapestries depicting the founding of the 12 territories had been hung from the vaulted ceiling. Hundreds of black candles cast a warm, flickering light over the assembled nobility of Lunarfall. The air was heavy with incense and anticipation. Lyra stood at the entrance to the hall, dressed in a gown of silver that flowed like liquid moonlight around her slender form. Her dark hair had been braided with white blossoms and tiny silver chains that chimed softly with each step. Around her throat, a collar of intricately worked silver set with moonstones, the traditional adornment of a royal bride on her wedding day. Elder Gaia waited on the dais at the far end of the hall, her ceremonial robes of midnight blue stark against her silver hair. Beside her stood the other members of the Council of Seven, their ancient faces solemn as they watched Lyra's approach. And between them, waiting like a statue carved from shadow and light, was King Alexander. He wore black armor polished to a mirror shine, unadorned save for the royal crest embossed on the breastplate, a wolf's head crowned with stars. A cloak of deepest crimson draped from his broad shoulders, pooling around his boots like spilled blood. His face was a mask, revealing nothing of the man who had offered her freedom just the night before. The traditional wedding march began. A slow, haunting melody played on instruments so old their origins had been forgotten. Lyra took her first step into the hall, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. These were the nobles who had ignored her existence for years, the same people who had whispered about her wolfless state, who had speculated cruelly about her family's fall from grace. Now they watched her with a mixture of pity and calculation, already measuring the political advantages they might gain from the unusual union. As she walked the long aisle toward her destiny, Lyra caught snippets of whispered conversation. "Poor thing, she won't last a month. The Silverstone blood is weak, always has been. A desperate measure by a desperate council." She kept her gaze fixed on Alexander, drawing strength from his stillness. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not as lovers, not even as friends, but as two people caught in the same storm, trying to survive. When she reached the dais, Alexander extended his hand. Lyra placed her smaller one in his, noting the surprising warmth of his skin despite his pallor. His fingers closed gently around hers. And for a moment, just a moment, the mask slipped, and she glimpsed in his eyes a wordless gratitude that she had chosen to stay. Elder Gaia raised her gnarled hands, and silence fell over the great hall. "We gather under the blood moon," she intoned, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space, "to witness the binding of two souls, two destinies, two fates entwined by forces greater than ourselves." The ritual began with ancient words in a language so old that even the scholars of Lunarfall could only guess at its origins. Elder Gaia drew symbols in the air with her fingers, leaving trails of silvery light that hung suspended between the king and his bride. The other members of the council joined in, their voices weaving a tapestry of sound that seemed to press against Lyra's skin, making it difficult to breathe. "The vessel stands empty," Elder White Oak declared, her blind eyes fixed on some middle distance. "The flame flickers, seeking shelter from the winds of dissolution." "The bloodlines converge," Elder Ironheart continued, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. Ravenwood and Silverstone, power and potential, strength and sanctuary. Alexander's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around Lyra's as the ritual progressed. She could feel a fine tremor running through him, though his face remained composed. Whatever pain he was experiencing, he was determined not to show it. The moment of binding drew near. A silver chalice was brought forward, ancient and heavy with the weight of tradition. Into it, Elder Gaia poured clear water from a crystal vial. Water, the element of life and death, of cleansing and dissolution, she said. Water to carry the essence of one soul to another. Next came a vial of rich red liquid that could only be blood. Blood of the Alpha line, unbroken since the first wolf walked the earth, Elder Gaia continued. Blood to bind the king's essence to his bride. Finally, she added 3 drops of a silvery substance that glowed with an inner light. Essence of moonstone, ground to dust and suspended in the tears of a true oracle, she explained, to guide the wolf spirit safely across the void between vessels. The mixture in the chalice began to glow with a soft, pulsing light. Elder Gaia lifted it carefully in her ancient hands and turned to Alexander. Alexander Ravenwood, Alpha King of Lunarfall, Lord of the 12 territories, do you freely offer your essence to this vessel, knowing that once given, it cannot be reclaimed until death separates you? Alexander's voice was steady as he answered. I do. Elder Gaia nodded and turned to Lyra. Lyra Silverstone, daughter of the line of ancient vessels, do you freely accept the essence of your king, knowing that his strength and his burden will become yours to bear until death separates you? Lyra looked up at Alexander, at the man who had offered her freedom and now stood beside her in chains of duty and destiny neither of them had forged. I do, she said, her voice clear in the hushed hall. Then drink, Elder Gaia instructed, holding the chalice first to Alexander's lips. He took a small sip, his eyes never leaving Lyra's face. When Elder Gaia held the chalice to Lyra's lips, she hesitated only a fraction of a second before drinking. The liquid was unexpectedly sweet, with an undertone of something wild and ancient, like forests after a storm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then heat bloomed in Lyra's chest, spreading outward through her limbs in waves of increasing intensity. She gasped, her free hand flying to her throat as the sensation built from warmth to fire to a searing blaze that consumed her from within. Alexander's grip on her hand became crushing. His eyes widened, the dull gray suddenly shot through with flickers of gold like lightning in storm clouds. A sound escaped him, not quite a groan, not quite a growl, as his body went rigid with pain or shock or both. The assembled nobility watched in fascinated horror as the king and his bride stood frozen in what appeared to be mutual agony. Elder Gaia stepped back, her face a mask of calculated observation. The other members of the council leaned forward in anticipation. Inside Lyra's mind, something stirred. Something vast and ancient and wild, with teeth and claws and hunger. Something that recognized her emptiness as sanctuary and surged toward it with desperate need. Alexander's wolf. It came not as a gentle presence, but as a tidal wave of primal power, of ancient instinct, of raw alpha dominance crashing into the hollow spaces within her. Lyra's body arched backward, her spine bowing under the force of the invasion. A scream tore from her throat, a sound of shock and transformation and terrible, wonderful becoming. Alexander fell to his knees beside her, his face contorted in a rictus of pain or ecstasy. Golden light poured from his eyes, his mouth, seemingly from his very skin, flowing into Lyra like liquid fire. The connection between them was visible now, a bridge of light that pulsed with each racing heartbeat. The crowd gasped collectively, drawing back in superstitious fear. This was no gentle ritual of symbolic union. This was old magic, wild and unpredictable, manifesting with a violence none had anticipated. "What's happening?" Elder White Oak demanded, her blind eyes wide with alarm. "This is not how the ritual should progress."
Elder Gaia stood transfixed, her ancient face alight with a terrible wonder. "The king's wolf," she whispered. "It's fighting the curse, fighting to live." Inside Lyra's mind, the wolf's presence expanded, filling every corner, every crevice of the emptiness that had defined her existence. It was overwhelming, terrifying, exhilarating. She could feel its confusion, its pain, its primal rage at being torn from its human host. She could feel Alexander through the wolf, his strength, his honor, his fear, his resignation to death, and something else. A darkness lurking at the edges of the connection, watching, waiting, hungry. The curse. With a final surge of golden light that momentarily blinded everyone in the hall, the transfer completed. Lyra collapsed to the stone floor, her body trembling with aftershocks. Beside her, Alexander lay still as death, his face ashen, his breathing shallow. Then slowly, he opened his eyes, not the dull gray of recent weeks, not the blazing gold of his wolf, but a clear human brown, alert and aware in a way they hadn't been since the curse struck. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Are you—" "I can feel it," she gasped, pressing a hand to her chest where a second heartbeat seemed to thunder alongside her own. "Your wolf. It's... Words failed her. How could she describe the sensation of hosting another being's essence? The wolf was not fully present, not as it would be in its true host, but neither was it a passive passenger. It prowled the boundaries of her consciousness, testing, exploring, claiming. Alexander reached for her hand, and when their skin touched, a spark of golden light flashed between them. They both jerked back in surprise. "The bond is formed," Elder Gaia announced, her voice carrying over the murmurs of the stunned crowd. "The ritual is complete." She looked down at Alexander, a strange mixture of triumph and wariness in her ancient eyes. "How do you feel, Your Majesty?" Alexander sat up slowly, each movement careful but less pained than before. "Different," he said, after a moment's consideration. "Lighter, but incomplete." "And you, my dear?" Elder Gaia turned to Lyra, who was still struggling to accommodate the new presence within her. "Full," Lyra managed. "So full I might burst." A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the crowd, quickly silenced by a sharp look from Elder Ironheart. "Help them to the royal chambers," Elder Gaia instructed the waiting attendants. "They must rest. The bond will stabilize over the coming days." As Lyra was helped to her feet, she caught sight of a face in the crowd that made her blood run cold, despite the fire still burning within her. General Blackthorn, Alexander's second-in-command, watched the proceedings with an expression of barely concealed fury. When he noticed Lyra's gaze, his lips curled in a sneer that promised retribution. The attendants led Lyra and Alexander from the great hall, through corridors hushed with speculation, and finally to the royal suite in the western tower. There they were separated, Lyra to the Queen's chambers, Alexander to the King's, with adjoining doors left open to accommodate the new bond that required proximity to stabilize. Alone in a room more luxurious than any she had ever occupied, Lyra sank onto the edge of a massive bed draped in silks and furs. Inside her mind, Alexander's wolf paced restlessly, disoriented and uncertain in its new environment. She could feel its confusion, its longing for its true host, its instinctive distrust of this strange new vessel. "I know," she whispered to it. "I don't understand either, but we're bound now, you and I. We must make the best of it." The wolf paused in its pacing, sensing her attempt at communication. A feeling of tentative curiosity flowed from it, followed by a cautious acceptance. Not friendship, not yet, but a truce born of necessity. Lyra lay back on the bed, exhaustion claiming her as the adrenaline of the ritual faded. As she drifted toward sleep, a strange sensation prickled along her skin. She held up her hand in the moonlight that streamed through the tower windows. For just a moment, she could have sworn she saw translucent claws extending from her fingertips, claws made of shadow and light, there and gone in an instant. The blood moon ritual was complete, but Lyra Silverstone's transformation had only just begun. In the days that followed, Lyra and Alexander settled into an uneasy rhythm. The bond between them required regular physical proximity to maintain stability, so they found themselves sharing meals, attending council meetings together, and spending quiet evenings in the royal library or gardens. They rarely touched. The spark that had passed between them after the ritual had been startling enough to make both wary, but they were seldom more than a room apart. Alexander's strength returned gradually. The curse that had been devouring him was not gone, but its progress had been halted by the transfer of his wolf to Lyra. He moved with more ease, spoke with more authority, and even managed to resume some of his royal duties under the watchful eyes of the council. For Lyra, the adjustment was more complicated. The presence of Alexander's wolf within her was a constant shifting weight, sometimes comforting, sometimes overwhelming. She woke in the night to find her eyes glowing gold in the mirror, her teeth sharpened to points. Strange cravings overtook her at odd moments, a hunger for rare meat, an urge to run beneath the moon, a desire to challenge those who questioned her authority in the palace. "It's my wolf's instincts manifesting through you," Alexander explained when she confided these experiences to him. They sat in his private study, a fire crackling in the hearth against the autumn chill. "He's an alpha wolf, accustomed to dominance and leadership. Those impulses don't simply disappear because he's changed vessels." "How do you control it?" Lyra asked, wrapping her arms around herself. "The wildness, the hunger?" Alexander's eyes, now a warm brown without the gold of his wolf, regarded her thoughtfully. "Years of practice, discipline, and acceptance that the wolf is not something to be controlled, but rather guided. It is part of me, or was." A shadow of loss crossed his face. "Now it's part of you." Lyra nodded, studying the man across from her. In the week since the ritual, she had come to see Alexander Ravenwood not as the remote, intimidating figure of royal portraits, but as a complex individual shaped by duty and sacrifice. He was stern but fair, reserved but not cold, burdened by the weight of rule, but never crushed by it. "Tell me about my father," she said suddenly. "You promised you would." Alexander stilled, then nodded. "I did." He rose from his chair and crossed to a cabinet, retrieving a decanter of amber liquid and 2 glasses. After pouring a small measure into each, he handed one to Lyra. "This conversation requires fortification." Lyra accepted the glass, inhaling the rich aroma of aged spirits. Was he truly a traitor, as they claimed? "No." Alexander's voice was firm. "General Silverstone was many things. Stubborn, opinionated, sometimes reckless, but never disloyal." He took a sip from his glass, gathering his thoughts. 15 years ago, we received intelligence about a plot to assassinate the royal family. The information came from a source deep within enemy territory, a source your father had cultivated for years. Lyra listened, transfixed, as Alexander unfolded a tale of political intrigue, betrayal, and sacrifice. Her father had been sent to investigate the threat, only to discover that the plot reached into the highest levels of Lunar Falls government. He had uncovered evidence implicating several council members in a conspiracy to overthrow Alexander and install a puppet ruler more amenable to foreign interests. "When he brought this evidence to me," Alexander continued, his voice low with remembered pain, "we realized we faced an impossible choice. A public accusation would tear the kingdom apart in civil war. A private resolution would leave the conspirators free to try again." "So what did you do?" Lyra asked, barely breathing. "We created a third option. Your father agreed to play the role of traitor, to be publicly disgraced and exiled. This satisfied the conspirators, who believed they had neutralized the threat he posed. Meanwhile, he continued his investigation from the shadows, feeding information back to me through channels so secret even the council was unaware of them." "But he died," Lyra whispered. "He and my mother both." Alexander's face darkened with genuine grief. "That was never part of the plan. Your father's cover was compromised.
He was assassinated before we could extract him and your mother to safety. Their deaths were made to look like a tragic accident, a house fire started by a knocked-over lamp. He met Lyra's gaze directly. I failed him, Lyra. Failed them both. And by extension, I failed you. Lyra sat in stunned silence, the glass forgotten in her hand. All these years, she had lived with the shame of her father's supposed betrayal, never knowing he had been a hero working in secret to protect his king and kingdom. Who? She finally asked, her voice tight with controlled fury. Who was behind the conspiracy? Who ordered his death? Alexander's gaze slid away from hers. That is where the story becomes complicated. Your father's last message contained a name, but it was a name so unlikely, so impossible, that I refused to believe it without further evidence. Tell me, Lyra insisted, the wolf within her stirring at her anger, lending strength to her demand. General Marcus Blackthorne. Alexander's voice was heavy with reluctance. My second in command for 15 years, the man who saved my life in battle more times than I can count. The name struck Lyra like a physical blow. She had seen Blackthorne at the ritual, had felt his hatred like a tangible force. You don't believe it, she realized, studying Alexander's face. Even now you don't believe my father. I don't want to believe it, Alexander corrected. There's a difference, but recent events have forced me to reconsider many things I once took as certainties. He set down his glass and leaned forward, his expression grave. The curse that struck me did not come from nowhere, Lyra. Someone with intimate knowledge of my movements, my habits, my weaknesses, had to have orchestrated it. Blackthorne, Lyra whispered. Possibly. But if so, he is not working alone. The curse that afflicts me is ancient magic, far beyond the capabilities of a warrior like Blackthorne. Someone else is involved. Someone with knowledge of the old ways. A chill ran down Lyra's spine as pieces began to click into place. The council? Alexander's mouth tightened. Some of them, perhaps. Not all. Elder Gaia, I believe, is genuinely trying to save me, and by extension, the stability of the kingdom. The others, he shrugged. Power attracts those who hunger for it. What do we do? Lyra asked, the word we slipping out before she could consider its implications. Alexander noted it with a flicker of surprise, then something like gratitude. For now we observe. We learn. We trust no one completely. He reached across the space between them, hesitating before gently taking her hand. The contact sent a warm buzz through the bond between them, but no flash of light this time. And we strengthened the bond that they did not anticipate would become a true partnership rather than a simple transfer of power. Lyra looked down at their joined hands, feeling the wolf within her settle at the touch of its true master. They underestimated us both, she said softly. A mistake they will soon regret, Alexander agreed, a hint of the alpha's steel returning to his voice. That night, while Alexander slept in the adjoining chamber, Lyra slipped from her bed and padded silently to the window. The moon was waning now, but still bright enough to cast silver shadows across the palace grounds. Within her, the wolf stirred restlessly, yearning for open spaces, for the freedom to run beneath that silver light. A movement in the gardens below caught her attention. Two figures walked the gravel paths, their heads bent close together in what appeared to be intense conversation. Even from a distance, Lyra recognized General Blackthorne's distinctive broad-shouldered silhouette. The other figure was smaller, cloaked and hooded despite the mild night. As if sensing her scrutiny, Blackthorne suddenly looked up. Even across the distance, Lyra felt the weight of his gaze, the hatred in it. The wolf within her responded with a surge of protective rage so powerful she had to grip the windowsill to remain upright. Her vision sharpened impossibly, allowing her to see Blackthorne's face with perfect clarity despite the darkness and distance. He smiled up at her, a cold, knowing smile that promised retribution, before turning away and continuing his conversation with the mysterious hooded figure. Inside Lyra's mind, Alexander's wolf growled a warning. The game was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun.
The next morning, Lyra woke to find a small leather-bound journal on her bedside table. It had not been there when she'd finally returned to bed the night before. The cover was worn with age, the pages yellowed and fragile. A note in Alexander's precise handwriting lay beside it. Found in the secret archives. Your mother's journal from her time at court. Read it alone. Hands trembling slightly, Lyra opened the journal. The first entry was dated 20 years earlier, written in a flowing script that stirred faint memories of her mother reading bedtime stories, of gentle hands brushing hair from her forehead. Today I begin my service as handmaiden to the Queen, the entry began. The palace is everything I imagined and more, beautiful, intimidating, filled with secrets and dangers for a girl from the borderlands. Already I've been warned about court politics, about watching my words, about guarding my heart. But how can I guard against what I've already lost? He does not know I exist, of course. Why would he? He is the captain of the royal guard, the king's most trusted warrior. And I am nothing but a shadow, a servant, a girl with strange dreams and stranger abilities that must remain hidden at all costs. Lyra read on, entranced, as her mother's story unfolded across the pages. The handmaiden who fell in love with a young officer named Jared Silverstone, the discovery of her pregnancy, the revelation of her bloodline's secret abilities to her new husband, the birth of a daughter who showed signs of being different from the moment she drew her first breath. And then, the darkness began to seep into the narrative. Strange visitors in the Queen's chambers late at night, whispered conversations about ancient pacts and blood magic, a conspiracy that reached into the heart of the kingdom. I fear what I have discovered, read an entry dated just weeks before her mother had left court to join Lyra's father in exile. The Queen speaks of a hieros gamos, a sacred marriage between the bloodlines of power and magic. She has seen my daughter, has remarked on her emptiness as if it were a precious quality rather than a defect. I must warn Jared. We must take Lyra and flee before they can use her for their ritual. The final entry chilled Lyra to the bone. It is too late. The Pact of 300 years has been invoked. The blood moon approaches. They will come for her, for my wolfless child, for the vessel they have sought for generations. May the spirits of our ancestors forgive me for what I must now do to protect her. If we survive, she must never know her true purpose. Better to live as an outcast than as the sacrifice they intend to make of her. The journal ended there, leaving Lyra with more questions than answers. What was the Pact of 300 years? What ritual had her mother feared? And most importantly, what did it all have to do with the current conspiracy against Alexander? The answers, she suspected, lay somewhere in the palace's ancient archives, in the dusty tomes of forgotten lore, in the memories of those old enough to remember the days before the Great Unification. And perhaps in the mind of the wolf that now resided within her, a creature far older and wiser than its human host had been. As if sensing her thoughts, the wolf stirred, pressing against the boundaries of her consciousness. Images flickered through Lyra's mind, fragments of Alexander's memories seen through his wolf's eyes. A midnight ritual in a stone circle deep in the forest, blood spilled on ancient altars, a pact sealed with magic darker than any modern werewolf would dare to wield, and a name, repeated in reverent whispers by hooded figures, the hieros gamos, the sacred marriage, the union that would bring forth the child of prophecy, born of the bloodlines of power and magic, destined to rule not just Lunarfall, but all the lands where werewolves roamed. Lyra closed the journal with shaking hands. The ritual that had bound her to Alexander was no desperate measure to save a dying king. It was something far older, far more calculated, a piece in a game that had been playing out for generations. And she and Alexander were the unwitting players, moved about the board by forces they had only begun to comprehend. The ancient archives beneath Wolfhaven Palace had remained sealed for generations. Dust lay thick upon shelves of crumbling parchment and leather-bound tomes, so old their titles had faded into illegibility. The air hung heavy with the musty scent of forgotten knowledge and the lingering traces of preservation spells cast long ago by archivists now themselves turned to dust. Lyra ran her fingers along the spines of books whose languages had not been spoken in centuries. The wolf within her stirred uneasily in this place of ancient magic. It recognized power here, dormant but potent, like a sleeping predator that might wake at any moment. Most of these texts predate the Great Unification, Alexander explained, as he lifted a brass lantern higher, casting its warm glow across rows of scrolls secured in ornate wooden cases. When the 12 territories joined under a single crown, each contributed their most precious lore to this repository as a gesture of trust and shared knowledge. And yet they've been left to rot, Lyra observed, noting the cobwebs that draped like silvery curtains between the shelves. Not rot, sleep. Alexander's voice held a note of reverence. The knowledge contained here was deemed too dangerous for casual study. Only the monarch and selected council members are permitted access, and even then, only in times of greatest need. Like now, Lyra said softly. Like now. Alexander nodded, his expression grave in the lantern light. They had come to the archives in search of answers, about the curse that afflicted Alexander, about the mysterious pact mentioned in her mother's journal, about the true purpose behind their unexpected union. 3 nights had passed since Lyra had discovered the journal. 3 nights of increasingly disturbing dreams that seemed to blend her own fears with the wolf's memories. 3 nights of waking to find her hands transformed into those strange claws of shadow and light, only to fade back to human fingers moments later. The bond between them had grown stronger with each passing day. Lyra could now sense Alexander's physical presence anywhere within the palace, could feel echoes of his emotions when they ran particularly strong. Similarly, he had begun to exhibit fleeting manifestations of his wolf's power through her, enhanced senses, bursts of preternatural speed, a predator's instinctive understanding of weakness and vulnerability in those around them. They had kept these developments secret from the council, sharing them only with Elder Gaia, whose ancient eyes had widened with something like awe when Lyra demonstrated the shadow claws that now formed at will with sufficient concentration. The bond evolves, the old werewolf had murmured. It adapts. Fascinating. Now they searched for precedent, for explanation, for anything that might help them understand what was happening and what might yet come. Alexander led Lyra deeper into the archives, past sections dedicated to military history, royal genealogy, and diplomatic correspondence, until they reached a small circular chamber at what felt like the very heart of the labyrinth. Unlike the rest of the archives, this room showed signs of recent use. The floor had been swept clean, the single reading table polished to a soft glow. Candles burned in wall sconces, their flames suspiciously steady in the still air. 5 books lay open on the table, their pages marked with slips of parchment. "Someone has been here," Lyra whispered, the wolf within her instantly alert, suspicious. "Elder Gaia," Alexander confirmed after a quick examination of the books. "These are her research notes." He indicated delicate script that filled the margins of one ancient tome. "She's been searching for information about the blood moon ritual and its historical precedents." Lyra peered over his shoulder at the book. The text was written in Old Lunar, the ceremonial language used in werewolf rituals, but the margins contained translations and annotations in modern script. One passage had been heavily underlined, with exclamation marks scattered throughout Gaia's notes. "The vessel born of the silver line shall carry the wolf of power through the valley of shadows. Neither truly one nor truly two, they shall walk the boundary between realms. What was sundered shall be made whole. What was broken shall be reforged. The blood moon heralds not an ending but a beginning, the birth of the child of 2 worlds." "This reads like a prophecy," Lyra said, a chill running down her spine. "Or instructions," Alexander replied grimly. He turned to another marked passage. "Listen to this. The sacred marriage requires 3 elements: the alpha of purest lineage, the vessel of silver blood, and the catalyst of shadow and light. When these 3 converge beneath the blood moon, The ancient compact shall be fulfilled, and power beyond mortal reckoning shall be unleashed upon the world. Lyra's mind raced. The Alpha is you. The vessel is me.
But what is the catalyst?
Or who? Alexander said softly. He turned to a third book, this one filled with intricate diagrams of celestial alignments. The blood moon occurs only once every 70 years. The last was 3 months ago, the night of our binding ritual. That can't be coincidence, Lyra murmured, the pieces beginning to align in her mind. The council didn't choose that date at random. They didn't choose me at random either. Nor my affliction, Alexander added, his voice tightening with controlled anger. Consider the timing. I fall ill with a mysterious curse that resists all traditional healing. The council declares that only an ancient ritual performed with a wolfless omega of the Silverstone line can save me. They schedule this ritual precisely on the blood moon. His fist clenched on the table. We were manipulated, Lyra, every step of the way. But to what end? Lyra pressed. What is this ancient compact that's mentioned? What power is supposed to be unleashed? Before Alexander could answer, a soft noise at the chamber's entrance drew their attention. Both turned, Alexander moving instinctively to place himself between Lyra and the potential threat. Lady Victoria Winterbloom stood in the doorway, her ancient frame seeming too fragile to support the weight of the heavy robes she wore. Her white hair was bound in an intricate series of braids that marked her as a practitioner of the old ways, a keeper of knowledge even the council respected. I wondered when you would find your way here, she said, her voice surprisingly strong for one who appeared so frail. The pieces begin to assemble themselves, do they not? Alexander relaxed slightly, though wariness remained in his posture. Lady Winterbloom, you're a long way from your tower. As are you from your throne, Your Majesty. Her pale blue eyes, sharp as winter ice, fixed on Lyra. And you, child, how fares the wolf within you? Does it pace the boundaries of your soul, testing the limits of its new vessel? Lyra stiffened, unsettled by the old woman's perception. You know about the bond? A sound that might have been a laugh escaped Lady Winterbloom's withered lips. I know many things, including what you now seek to understand. She glided into the chamber with surprising grace. The Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage, the fulfillment of a pact made 300 years ago when the first Ravenwood king united the warring territories under a single crown. What pact? Alexander demanded, his patience visibly thinning. Speak plainly, Lady Winterbloom. We've had enough of riddles and half-truths. The old woman smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp for a human mouth. Very well, plain speech it shall be. She gestured to the books spread across the table. What do you know of the origin of werewolves, Your Majesty? Alexander frowned at the apparent change of subject, but answered. The old tales speak of a bond between wolf spirits and human warriors, a sharing of strength and instinct that allowed our ancestors to defeat a great darkness that threatened the world. A simplified version, but essentially correct. Lady Winterbloom nodded approvingly. What the tales neglect to mention is that this bond was not freely given. It was a bargain struck between the human king Alaric the Great and entities from beyond the veil of our world, entities with powers beyond mortal comprehension. In exchange for the ability to shift forms and share consciousness with the wolf spirits, Alaric promised that when the stars aligned in a specific configuration, what we now call the blood moon, a descendant of his line would serve as a vessel for something far greater than a mere wolf spirit. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. What kind of entity? Lady Winterbloom's eyes glittered in the candlelight. The records are deliberately vague on that point. They refer to it only as the shadow that walks, a being of immense power that exists primarily in the realm beyond the veil, able to influence our world only through specific conduits. Like a wolfless omega, Alexander said slowly. Precisely. Lady Winterbloom gestured to Lyra. The absence of a wolf spirit creates a vacuum within certain individuals. Nature abhors a vacuum. Something will always rush in to fill the empty spaces. She moved to the table and turned one of the books toward them, pointing to an illustration that showed a figure surrounded by tendrils of darkness. For 300 years, the Ravenwood Kings have upheld their end of the ancient bargain. Every 70 years, when the blood moon rises, they provide a vessel from the silver bloodline, your mother's lineage child, to serve as host for the entity.
"But my mother fled the court," Lyra said, remembering the journal. "She and my father took me away before I could be used in this ritual."
Indeed they did. Lady Winterbloom's expression softened momentarily. Ilaria was always too clever for her own good. She discovered the truth about your heritage and the role you were meant to play. Her escape with General Silverstone threw the carefully laid plans into disarray. A shadow passed over her ancient features. The consequences were severe. "The assassination," Alexander said grimly, "not because of the political conspiracy my father uncovered, but because they took the vessel that was needed for the ritual." "Both truths can exist simultaneously, Your Majesty," Lady Winterbloom replied. "The political conspiracy your general uncovered was real enough. It simply served a deeper purpose than mere power struggles within the court." Lyra struggled to process this flood of revelations. "But the ritual did eventually happen. Alexander and I were bound beneath the blood moon. If that was what they wanted all along, why the elaborate deception? Why the curse?" Lady Winterbloom smiled again, a cold expression that never reached her eyes. "Because the bargain requires willing participants. Coercion nullifies the compact. You both had to choose the binding of your own free will, believing it served a purpose you valued, saving the king's life, saving the kingdom from chaos. The truth could not be revealed without risking your refusal." A heavy silence fell over the chamber as the implications sank in. Alexander's face had gone hard as stone, his eyes dark with suppressed fury. Lyra felt the wolf within her responding to his anger, hackles rising, a low growl building in her mind. "Who orchestrated this?" Alexander finally asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Who on the council knows the full truth? Some questions are best left unanswered until one is prepared to act on the knowledge." Lady Winterbloom replied cryptically. She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "The darkness will come for you soon, child. It has waited 300 years for this moment. It will not be denied its prize." With that ominous warning, she glided away, leaving Alexander and Lyra alone with the weight of revelations too enormous to fully comprehend. That night, the darkness came. Lyra woke from troubled sleep to find her bedroom filled with a thick, unnatural shadow that seemed to absorb the moonlight streaming through the windows. The temperature had plummeted, her breath fogging in the suddenly frigid air. Within her mind, Alexander's wolf snarled in warning, pressing against the boundaries of her consciousness as if trying to shield her from what approached. A figure coalesced from the darkness at the foot of her bed, not fully solid, but more substantial than mere shadow. It had the shape of a man, tall and imposing, but its features were obscured, as if viewed through smoke. Only its eyes were clear, twin pools of liquid silver that held no pupil, no iris, only an ancient, inhuman intelligence that fixed upon Lyra with terrifying intensity. "Vessel," it said, its voice a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "At last." Lyra froze, terror rendering her momentarily immobile. The wolf within her howled in defiance, the sound echoing in the chambers of her mind. She felt a surge of its power flowing through her limbs, lending her strength, courage. "What are you?" she managed, her voice surprisingly steady. "I am the bargain and the debt," the shadow replied. "I am what was promised. I am what is owed." It drifted closer, tendrils of darkness extending toward her like grasping fingers. The air grew colder still, a bone-deep chill that seemed to reach for her very soul. "Your bloodline has denied me for too long," it continued, silver eyes gleaming with an emotion Lyra couldn't name, hunger perhaps, or triumph. "But the stars have aligned. The Pact has been invoked. You are mine, Lyra Silverstone. The empty vessel awaits its true occupant." The shadow lunged forward, enveloping her in freezing darkness that pressed against her skin, seeking entrance. Lyra felt it probing the edges of her being, searching for a way past the wolf that stood guard within her. Pain exploded behind her eyes as two opposing forces battled for dominance. The wolf fighting to protect its temporary home, the shadow determined to claim what it believed was its by right. Lyra screamed, the sound tearing from her throat and shattering the frozen silence of her chambers. The adjoining door burst open, and Alexander rushed in, wearing only sleep trousers, his bare chest gleaming with sweat despite the unnatural cold. His eyes widened at the sight of Lyra enveloped in writhing darkness. "Lyra!" he shouted, lunging toward the bed. The shadow whirled to face this new threat, its form elongating, becoming more substantial. It released Lyra momentarily to meet Alexander's charge. "The bondmate," it hissed, sounding almost pleased. "The final element. Perfect." Alexander didn't hesitate. He plunged directly into the shadow, hands outstretched as if he could physically tear it away from Lyra. The moment he made contact, golden light flared between them, the same light that had manifested during their bonding ritual, but stronger now, more focused. The shadow shrieked, a sound like tearing metal that made Lyra's teeth ache. It recoiled from Alexander, momentarily driven back by the golden radiance that poured from the connection between king and vessel. Lyra seized the opportunity. Concentrating fiercely, she summoned the strange claws of shadow and light that had been manifesting since the ritual. They formed instantly, more substantial than ever before, 10 gleaming talons of intertwined darkness and radiance extending from her fingertips. Acting on instinct, or perhaps guided by the wolf within her, Lyra slashed at the shadowy entity. Her claws seemed to catch on its insubstantial form, tearing through it like fabric. Another shriek filled the chamber, the shadowy figure writhing in apparent agony. "Together!" Alexander shouted, reaching for her hand. The moment their fingers touched, the golden light intensified, spreading up their arms and across their bodies until they both glowed like living flames in the darkness. The wolf within Lyra howled in triumph, its power flowing freely between its original host and its temporary vessel, amplified by their physical connection. The shadow entity backed away, its silver eyes now reflecting something that looked almost like fear. "This is not possible," it hissed. "The vessel cannot resist. The bargain cannot be broken." "Watch us," Lyra spat, emboldened by the power surging through her and the solid presence of Alexander at her side. Together, they advanced on the shadow, golden light pushing back the darkness with each step. The entity continued to retreat until it reached the windows, where the natural moonlight seemed to weaken it further. "This is not the end," it warned, its voice fading as its form began to dissipate. "The blood pact cannot be denied. What was promised must be delivered. I will return when your guard falters, when your bond weakens, and next time I will not be denied." With those ominous words, the shadow dissolved into tendrils of darkness that slipped through cracks in the window panes and vanished into the night. The temperature in the room returned to normal, the oppressive atmosphere lifting like a physical weight removed. Lyra sagged against Alexander, suddenly exhausted. The claws of shadow and light faded from her fingers, though the golden glow around them both dimmed more slowly, lingering like the afterimage of lightning. "Are you hurt?" Alexander asked, his voice rough with concern, as he helped her to sit on the edge of the bed. "No," Lyra managed, though her entire body ached as if she'd run for miles. "Just drained. What was that thing?" "The shadow that walks," Alexander replied grimly. Lady Winterbloom's warning came none too soon. Lyra shuddered, remembering the entity's inhuman silver eyes. "It said it would return. And so it will." Alexander's arm tightened around her shoulders. "But we'll be ready." As the adrenaline of the encounter faded, Lyra became acutely aware of Alexander's proximity, of the heat of his skin against hers where their arms touched, of the steady rhythm of his heartbeat so close to her own. The wolf within her stirred in a different way now, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with battle or fear. Alexander seemed to sense the shift in her awareness. He looked down at her, his expression softening from grim determination to something more complex. For a moment, they remained frozen in that tableau, the king and his unusual bride, bound by magic and circumstance, now united by a common enemy. Then Alexander gently disentangled himself, though his hand lingered on her shoulder. "You should rest," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I'll have guards posted outside your door for the remainder of the night, though I doubt our shadowy visitor will return so soon after such a defeat." Lyra nodded, suddenly unable to meet his gaze. "Thank you," she said softly, "for coming when I called." "I will always come when you call, Lyra Silverstone." The simple declaration held the weight of an oath. The bond between us ensures that. After he had gone, Lyra lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. The wolf within her had settled, content for now, but her mind raced with questions. What exactly was the entity that had attacked her? What was this blood pact that had been mentioned? And how were she and Alexander meant to fight something that seemed more spirit than flesh? Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a dreamless sleep. But one question remained, hovering at the edges of her consciousness like a half-remembered melody. Was it only the magical bond that drew Alexander to her side so quickly? Or was something else developing between the king and his reluctant bride, something neither of them had anticipated? The following days brought a flurry of activity as Alexander mobilized the resources of the kingdom to investigate the shadow entity and prepare for its return. Elder Gaia was summoned to the royal chambers, where Lyra and Alexander recounted their nocturnal encounter in detail. The ancient werewolf listened with growing alarm, her gnarled fingers clutching her ashwood staff so tightly that her knuckles blanched white. "The shadow that walks," she murmured when they had finished. "I had hoped the old stories were just that, stories." "Clearly they're not," Alexander replied, pacing the length of his study with the restless energy of a caged predator. "Lady Winterbloom called it an entity from beyond the veil. What does that mean exactly?" Elder Gaia sighed heavily. "There are realms beyond our own, Your Majesty, planes of existence where beings of pure energy or spirit dwell. The veil between these worlds is usually impenetrable, but at certain times, like during the blood moon, it thins enough for contact to be made." "And Alaric the Great made contact," Lyra said, recalling Lady Winterbloom's explanation. "He struck a bargain with this entity." "So the records indicate," Elder Gaia confirmed, though the full details of the pact were kept secret, known only to each monarch and their most trusted advisors. She gave Alexander a pointed look. "Your father should have prepared you for this, Your Majesty." A shadow crossed Alexander's face. "My father died unexpectedly when I was barely 20. There were many things he did not have time to tell me." "Convenient," Lyra murmured, drawing surprised looks from both Alexander and Elder Gaia. "Don't you think? The king dies before passing on crucial information about a 300-year-old pact. Alexander falls ill with a mysterious curse just before the blood moon. I'm brought to the palace for a ritual no one fully explained to either of us." She leaned forward, eyes intense. "Someone has been manipulating events, Elder Gaia. Someone who knows about this pact and wants to ensure it's fulfilled." Elder Gaia's expression remained carefully neutral. "There are always those who seek to influence the course of history, child. The question is whether their motives align with the greater good." "And what exactly is the greater good in this scenario?" Alexander demanded. "A shadow entity attempting to possess Lyra? How does that benefit anyone?" "Power," Elder Gaia said simply. "The legends say that when the shadow that walks inhabits a vessel of the silver bloodline, it grants unimaginable power to those who control that vessel. Power to command the elements, power to see beyond the veil, power to transcend the limitations of mortality itself." A chill ran down Lyra's spine at these words. "And who would control me if this entity took possession?" "Whoever orchestrated your placement as the royal bride," Elder Gaia replied. "Whoever ensured that you and His Majesty were bound beneath the blood moon." Alexander's expression darkened further. The council? Some members, perhaps. Elder Gaia tapped her staff thoughtfully against the stone floor. But I suspect the true architect of these events stands apart from the council, pulling strings from the shadows. Blackthorn, Alexander said flatly. My father trusted him implicitly. He would have been privy to the secrets of the blood pact, and he's been positioning himself closer to the throne with each passing year. It's possible, Elder Gaia acknowledged. But General Blackthorn is a warrior, not a practitioner of the old magics. The curse that afflicted you, the ritual that bound you to Lady Silverstone, these required knowledge and power beyond his capabilities. So he's working with someone else, Lyra concluded. Someone with access to ancient lore and magical ability. Indeed. Elder Gaia's ancient eyes studied Lyra with renewed interest. You have a quick mind, child. Your mother was the same way, always seeing connections others missed. Before Lyra could respond to this unexpected mention of her mother, a sharp knock at the study door interrupted their conversation. Alexander called permission to enter, and a royal guard stepped into the room, his expression grave. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty," he said with a bow. "Lord Thornwald has arrived at the palace and demands an immediate audience. He says it concerns matters of utmost urgency regarding the security of the realm." Alexander and Elder Gaia exchanged a significant look that Lyra couldn't interpret. "Lord Thornwald," Alexander repeated, a strange tension entering his voice. "The former alpha of the Silver Wolf Pack. What business brings him from the Northern Territories after all these years?" "He would not say, Your Majesty," the guard replied. "Only that it concerns ancient pacts and shadows that walk in the night." A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Alexander nodded. "Very well. Show him to the small council chamber. I will meet him there shortly." After the guard had departed, Alexander turned to Lyra. "Lord Thornwald was once one of the most powerful alphas in the Northern Territories. He opposed my father's unification efforts for years before finally pledging allegiance to the crown. Since then, he has remained in his ancestral lands, rarely involving himself in the politics of the court." "And now he appears just when we're dealing with ancient pacts and shadow entities," Lyra observed. "Another coincidence?" "There are no coincidences in matters such as these," Elder Gaia said grimly. "Only patterns we have yet to recognize." Alexander moved to a cabinet on the far wall of his study. From it, he removed a ceremonial dagger with a blade that gleamed with an unnatural blue light. "This meeting may provide answers," he said, securing the weapon at his belt, "or it may create more questions. Either way, I want you both present." Lyra nodded, feeling the wolf within her stir with anticipation. Whatever revelations Lord Thornwald might bring, she sensed they would irrevocably change the course of their struggle against the shadow entity, and perhaps the future of the kingdom itself. Lord Thornwald cut an imposing figure despite his years, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick mane of silver-white hair and a beard that reached almost to his chest. He dominated the small council chamber with his mere presence. His eyes, a penetrating ice blue, fixed on Alexander with the unwavering gaze of one alpha assessing another. But it was his reaction to Lyra that proved most startling. The moment she entered the chamber behind Alexander, Lord Thornwald froze, his expression shifting from diplomatic neutrality to open shock. Something like pain flashed across his weathered features before being quickly masked. "Lady Silverstone," he said, her name emerging as barely more than a whisper, "you have your mother's eyes." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with implications Lyra couldn't fully grasp. How would this northern lord recognize her mother's eyes? What connection could possibly exist between them? Alexander, sensing the sudden tension, smoothly guided the conversation to more immediate concerns. "Lord Thornwald," he said, his voice carrying the subtle authority of the crown, "you requested this audience with claims of urgent matters regarding the security of the realm. We would hear what brings you to Wolfhaven after so long an absence." Thornwald tore his gaze from Lyra with visible effort, focusing once more on Alexander. "Forgive my directness, Your Majesty, but time is of the essence. The blood moon has passed. The ritual was performed. The vessel has been prepared." His eyes flickered briefly to Lyra again, and now the shadow stirs, seeking to claim what was promised 3 centuries ago. "You know of the blood pact," Alexander said flatly. Not a question. "I know more than most," Thornwald confirmed, his voice grave. "I was there 50 years ago, during the last blood moon, when your father performed the ritual with a vessel of the silver bloodline, a young woman named Elena, who did not survive the shadow's possession." Elder Gaia made a small sound of distress, drawing Thornwald's attention. "You remember, Elder," he said not unkindly. "You were there as well, though much younger then." "I remember," Gaia acknowledged, her ancient face somber. "A tragedy that should never have happened." "And yet here we are again," Thornwald said, his gaze returning to Lyra. "Another vessel, another potential tragedy, unless we act to break the cycle." "How?" Alexander demanded, leaning forward intently. "How do we break a pact that has endured for 3 centuries?" Thornwald's expression grew solemn. "By fulfilling it one final time, but on our terms rather than those of the shadow." He reached into his robes and withdrew an ancient scroll case made of silver and obsidian. This contains the original text of the Blood Pact, written in Alaric the Great's own hand. "I have safeguarded it since your father's death, waiting for this moment." He placed the scroll case on the council table with reverent care. "The pact has been misinterpreted, deliberately I suspect, by those who seek to use its power for their own ends. It does not call for the shadow to possess the vessel. Rather, it speaks of a joining, a balance between darkness and light, shadow and wolf." Lyra felt the wolf within her stir with interest at these words. "What kind of joining?" she asked. "A true hieros gamos," Thornwald replied. "A sacred marriage, not just of bodies or titles, but of essences. The alpha wolf spirit and the human soul in perfect balance, creating a conduit through which the shadow may communicate with our world without dominating it. A partnership, not a possession." "That's not what the entity we encountered seemed to want," Alexander pointed out. "It tried to force its way into Lyra, to claim her as its own." "Because that is what it has been led to believe is its right," Thornwald explained. "For generations, ambitious men have whispered to the shadow through the thinning veil, promising it complete control of a vessel in exchange for power. They have corrupted the original intent of the pact." "And the original intent was?" Elder Gaia prompted. Thornwald sighed heavily. "Alaric the Great faced a kingdom divided, 12 territories at constant war. He sought a way to unite them under a single crown, to end the bloodshed that had plagued our kind for generations. The shadow offered him the means, the ability for certain bloodlines to bond with wolf spirits, creating alphas of unprecedented power who could command loyalty through supernatural bonds rather than mere force of arms." "The first werewolves," Alexander murmured. "Indeed," Thornwald nodded. "But the power came at a price." "Every 70 years, when the veil between worlds thins during the blood moon, the shadow would be granted access to our realm through a vessel specially prepared, a member of the silver bloodline born without a wolf spirit, leaving space for something else to dwell within them. Not to possess them completely, but to share consciousness, to experience our world through their senses, to communicate its wisdom to the ruling alpha." "A diplomatic exchange," Lyra said, beginning to understand. "Not an invasion." "Precisely." Thornwald smiled slightly, approval warming his ice-blue eyes. "But over time, as the original participants died and their knowledge was passed down imperfectly, the true nature of the pact was forgotten or deliberately obscured. Those who coveted power saw the shadow's periodic return as an opportunity to harness otherworldly forces for their own benefit. So they began offering the shadow complete possession of the vessel," Alexander concluded, "in exchange for a share of its power." "With predictably catastrophic results," Thornwald confirmed grimly. "No human vessel, even one of the silver bloodline, can contain the full essence of such an entity for long. The pressure inevitably destroys them from within. Like my predecessor 50 years ago, Lyra said softly. And now someone intends the same fate for me. Unless we restore the balance as it was meant to be, Thornwald said, reaching for the scroll case. The true ritual requires 3 elements: the vessel of silver blood, the alpha of purest lineage, and the catalyst of shadow and light. As he spoke the final words, his fingers pressed a hidden catch on the scroll case. It opened with a soft click, revealing not a scroll, but a small crystal vial containing a swirling substance that seemed neither liquid nor gas, but something in between, glowing with an inner radiance that shifted between deepest black and brightest silver. The catalyst, Thornwald said reverently. Collected from the boundary between our world and the shadow realm during the last blood moon, preserved for this moment. Lyra stared at the vial, feeling the wolf within her respond to its presence with a mixture of wariness and recognition. What exactly is it? Essence of the boundary itself, Thornwald explained. Neither fully of our world nor fully of theirs. It is what allows the creation of a balanced conduit between realms. Alexander studied the vial with narrowed eyes. And how exactly is this meant to help us? The blood moon has passed. The ritual you describe cannot be performed for another 70 years. Not the full ritual, no, Thornwald agreed. But there is another way to achieve balance, a method hinted at in Alaric's original text, but never fully explained. It involves the marking ritual between Alpha and Omega. Alexander's expression sharpened. The claiming bite. We didn't perform that aspect of the bonding ritual because I was too weakened by the curse at the time. The council substituted a blood oath instead, which created an incomplete bond, Thornwald said, nodding. A doorway left partially open, allowing the shadow to attempt forced entry rather than proper invitation. If you complete the marking ritual, infused with the catalyst essence, you may be able to create the balanced conduit as it was originally intended. Lyra touched her throat unconsciously, where the traditional claiming bite would have been placed. Would that give the shadow access to me? Limited access, Thornwald corrected. Shared access, with the wolf spirit as counterbalance. The 3 essences, human, wolf, and shadow, would exist in equilibrium, each with influence, but none with complete control. Elder Gaia, who had been listening intently to this exchange, finally spoke. This is dangerously experimental magic, Lord Thornwald. If you are wrong, we risk not only Lady Silverstone's life, but potentially the stability of the veil between worlds. I am aware of the risks, Thornwald replied solemnly. But the alternative is to wait for the shadow to make another attempt at possession, one that might succeed where the first failed. And if it does, those who have been whispering promises to it will gain control over powers beyond mortal comprehension. A heavy silence fell over the small council chamber as the enormity of the choice before them sank in. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice quiet but firm. It should be my decision, she said. It's my life, my body, that would serve as this conduit. Alexander nodded immediately. Of course. No action will be taken without your full consent, Lyra. But you must understand the gravity of what you face, Thornwald added, his ice-blue eyes intense as they held Lyra's gaze. This is not a choice to be made lightly or quickly. You must consider all aspects, all potential outcomes. I understand, Lyra assured him. I'll need time to think, to process everything we've learned today. Time is a luxury we may not have in abundance, Thornwald warned. The shadow grows stronger with each passing day, drawing power from the residual energies of the blood moon, and those who seek to control it grow bolder as well. Who? Alexander demanded. Who leads this conspiracy? You seem to know far more than you've revealed, Lord Thornwald. The Northern Alpha's expression grew guarded. Suspicions without proof are dangerous weapons, Your Majesty. I would not level accusations without absolute certainty. He rose from his seat with fluid grace that belied his years. For now, guard the vessel well. The shadow will return, and with it, those who would use it for their own ends will reveal themselves. As Thornwald prepared to depart, Lyra found herself unable to silence the question that had burned in her mind since his startling reaction to her presence. "Lord Thornwald," she said, causing him to pause at the chamber door, "how did you know my mother's eyes?" A look of profound sorrow crossed his weathered features. "Another conversation for another time, Lady Silverstone," he replied softly. "But know this, Ilaria was the bravest soul I ever knew. You do her memory proud." With those enigmatic words, he bowed formally to Alexander and departed, leaving Lyra with more questions than answers, about the shadow, about the blood pact, and about her own mysterious heritage. The great assembly of pack leaders was a rare and solemn occasion, not summoned in over a decade. Representatives from all 12 territories gathered in Wolfhaven's ancient amphitheater, a vast stone structure carved into the mountainside above the palace. Row upon row of stone benches rose in concentric circles around a central speaking platform, allowing hundreds of alphas and their advisors to witness the proceedings. Alexander sat upon the moonstone throne, a massive chair hewn from a single block of the luminous stone that gave it its name. Beside him, in a slightly smaller but equally impressive seat, sat Lyra. Her presence at such a gathering was unprecedented. Royal consorts traditionally remained separate from matters of pact governance, but Alexander had been adamant. "If we are to face this threat together, we do so as equals before the assembled alphas," he had insisted when the council raised objections. "The queen sits beside the king." It was the first time he had referred to her as queen, rather than consort or bride, a distinction not lost on Lyra or the council members who had exchanged significant glances at the declaration. Now, as the last of the territorial representatives took their places, a hush fell over the amphitheater. Alexander rose, his ceremonial armor gleaming in the afternoon sun, the crown of lunar fall, a circlet of silver set with 13 moonstones representing the royal house and the 12 territories resting upon his brow. "Leaders of the 12 territories," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly to the farthest reaches of the amphitheater. "Alphas of the great pacts, I have summoned you to Wolfhaven not for celebration or ceremony, but to address a threat that concerns every werewolf in our realm." And he proceeded to explain the situation in measured terms. The ancient blood pact, the periodic return of the entity known as the Shadow that Walks, the attempts throughout history to harness its power for personal gain rather than the good of the kingdom. He spoke of the recent attack on Lyra and the information provided by Lord Thornwald regarding the true nature of the original agreement between Alaric the Great and the Shadow. "We stand at a crossroads," Alexander concluded. "The path we choose will determine not only the fate of the current vessel," he gestured to Lyra, "but potentially the future of our kind. If the Shadow gains full possession of a human host, those who control that host will wield power beyond imagining, power that could upset the delicate balance of leadership among our packs, power that could potentially enslave us all." A murmur of alarm spread through the assembled alphas. From his position at the forefront of the Northern Territory delegation, Lord Thornwald nodded grimly, his ice-blue eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for specific reactions. "What would you have us do, Your Majesty?" called out Lady Serena, Alpha of the Western Plains Pack. "How can the assembled leadership assist in addressing this threat?" Before Alexander could respond, a voice rang out from the Eastern Territory section. A voice that sent a chill down Lyra's spine. "Perhaps the first question should be whether this threat exists at all." General Blackthorn rose to his feet, his imposing figure drawing all eyes. "We have only the king's word that a shadow entity attempted to possess his bride. No one else witnessed this alleged attack." Alexander's expression hardened. "Are you questioning the word of your king, General Blackthorn?" "I question the wisdom of alarming the pack leaders with tales of ancient pacts and shadow entities based on a single, unverified incident," Blackthorn replied smoothly, "especially when that incident conveniently provides justification for the unusual circumstances of your recent marriage." A dangerous silence fell over the amphitheater.
Challenging the king so directly before the assembled Alpha leaders was unprecedented, bordering on open disrespect. "Choose your next words with extreme care, General," Alexander warned, his voice deceptively soft. "You tread perilously close to insubordination." Blackthorn seemed unperturbed by the warning. "I speak only out of concern for the stability of the realm, Your Majesty. The fact remains that you fell ill with a mysterious ailment. The council arranged a hasty marriage to a wolfless Omega of questionable lineage. Now we're told this unusual union was actually the fulfillment of an ancient pact with a shadow entity that may or may not exist." He spread his hands in a gesture that managed to appear both reasonable and condescending. "You must admit, it strains credulity." Lyra felt the wolf within her bristle at the insult, a growl building in the back of her throat. With effort, she maintained her composure, though her fingernails began to lengthen into the now familiar claws of shadow and light. She quickly concealed them in the folds of her gown. Elder Gaia rose from her place among the council members. "General Blackthorn forgets himself," she said, her ancient voice carrying surprising strength. "The blood pact is well documented in the royal archives. The periodicity of the blood-moon alignment is a matter of astronomical record, and the previous occurrences of vessels from the silver bloodline serving as conduits for the shadow are attested to by multiple sources, including myself, as witness to the events of 50 years ago." "With all due respect, Elder," Blackthorn countered, "ancient documents can be misinterpreted. Astronomical alignments occur without supernatural consequence every day, and memories, even those of esteemed council members, can grow unreliable with the passage of time." A ripple of discomfort passed through the assembly at this barely veiled suggestion that Elder Gaia's advanced age might have affected her mental faculties. Lord Thornwald stood then, commanding attention without raising his voice. "General Blackthorn seems unusually invested in discrediting evidence of the blood pact," he observed mildly. "One might wonder why." Blackthorn's expression darkened. "I am invested in the stability and security of the realm, Lord Thornwald. Something you might have concerned yourself with more during your years of self-imposed exile in the northern reaches." "I have served the realm in ways you cannot imagine, General," Thornwald replied, a dangerous edge entering his voice, "including safeguarding knowledge that others would misuse for personal gain." The tension between the two men was palpable, crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Alexander raised a hand, drawing attention back to the throne. "This assembly was not convened for personal disputes," he said firmly. "The question before us is simple. Do we acknowledge the threat posed by the shadow that walks and the conspiracy to harness its power, or do we dismiss it as superstition and coincidence?" He surveyed the gathered alphas. "I ask each territory to declare its position." What followed was a tense process, as representatives from each territory rose to state their views. The Western and Southern pacts quickly aligned with Alexander, expressing full support for his assessment of the threat. The Eastern pacts, traditionally allied with Blackthorn, expressed skepticism, but stopped short of outright opposition. The Northern pacts, led by Thornwald, pledged their resources to combating the shadow entity and those who would control it. As the last territory declared its cautious support for the crown, Blackthorn rose once more. "It seems I am outvoted," he acknowledged with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But before this assembly concludes, I feel compelled to raise one additional concern regarding the Queen's unique condition." Lyra tensed, sensing a trap in his careful phrasing. "The ancient laws of succession are clear," Blackthorn continued. "Only those of pure werewolf bloodlines may inherit the throne or produce heirs to the royal line. Yet our new queen is, by her own admission, wolfless, a genetic anomaly that raises serious questions about her suitability as royal consort." Murmurs spread through the amphitheater as the assembled alphas considered this point. The laws of succession were indeed strict, designed to maintain the strength of alpha bloodlines and the integrity of pack bonds. Furthermore, Blackthorn pressed, sensing the shift in the assembly's mood, if we are to believe the claims regarding this shadow entity,
then the Queen now hosts not only the King's wolf, but potentially a foreign consciousness from beyond the veil. This makes her neither purely human nor purely werewolf, but something other, something unprecedented and undefined by our laws. He turned to face Alexander directly. I move that the Queen's status be formally reviewed by the High Council of Alphas, and that until such review is complete, any children resulting from this union be considered ineligible for succession to the throne. The amphitheater erupted in shocked exclamations and heated debate. Lyra sat frozen, the wolf within her snarling in rage at the calculated attack. Alexander rose from the moonstone throne, his expression thunderous, but before he could speak, another voice cut through the cacophony. "I second the motion." A hooded figure stood at the back of the Eastern Territory section, throwing back their covering to reveal Lady Eleanor, the head of the Royal Healing Chambers and one of the few people who had attended Alexander during his mysterious illness. The integrity of the royal bloodline must be preserved, regardless of personal attachments. Alexander's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the assembly, now clearly divided on this unexpected challenge. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, but vibrating with barely suppressed fury. "General Blackthorne and Lady Eleanor raise an interesting point of law," he acknowledged, "one that conveniently ignores several critical facts." He stepped forward, commanding attention through sheer force of presence. "First, my marriage to Queen Lyra was arranged and approved by the full Council of Seven, following all proper protocols. Second, the blood moon ritual that bound us was overseen by Elder Gaia herself, ensuring its legitimacy under both ancient and modern law." He paused, letting these points sink in before delivering his final argument. "And third, perhaps most importantly, the Queen's unique status as host to my wolf spirit creates a bond unprecedented in our history. She is not merely my consort, but an extension of my very essence. To question her legitimacy is to question mine." A heavy silence fell over the amphitheater as the Alphas absorbed the implications of this declaration. Alexander was not merely defending his bride, he was effectively stating that any challenge to Lyra's status constituted a challenge to the throne itself. Blackthorne's expression remained carefully neutral, though a muscle ticked in his jaw. "The law must apply equally to all, Your Majesty, even kings." "Indeed it must," Alexander agreed coldly. "Which is why I find it fascinating that you would raise this legal challenge now, General, rather than when the Council first proposed the match. One might almost suspect an ulterior motive." Before Blackthorne could respond, a commotion at the entrance to the amphitheater drew all eyes. A royal guard sprinted down the central aisle, dropping to one knee before the throne. "Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty," he gasped, clearly having run some distance. "The palace is under attack. Dark creatures, shadow beasts, have manifested throughout the lower levels. The royal guard struggles to contain them." Alexander's gaze snapped to Blackthorne, whose surprise appeared genuine. "It seems our debate has been rendered academic," the king said grimly. "The shadow makes its move while we argue legal technicalities." He turned to address the assembled Alphas. "Those who pledge support, I call upon you now. Defend Wolfhaven. Defend your king and queen." As the amphitheater erupted in activity, Alphas calling their packs to arms and organizing defensive formations, Alexander leaned close to Lyra. "This is no coincidence," he murmured. "The timing is too perfect. Someone wanted the leadership gathered here, away from the palace, when the attack came." Lyra nodded, her mind racing. Blackthorne's challenge was a distraction, meant to occupy the assembly while the Shadow's forces infiltrated the palace. She glanced at the general, who was now issuing orders to his Eastern Territory warriors with apparent urgency. But is he the mastermind, or another piece being moved across the board? "We'll soon find out," Alexander replied grimly. He raised his voice to address Elder Gaia, who had made her way to the royal dais. "Escort the queen to the sanctuary beneath the North Tower. It's warded against spiritual entities." "I'm not hiding while you fight," Lyra protested, the wolf within her bristling at the suggestion. Alexander's expression softened momentarily. "I'm not asking you to hide, Lyra. I'm asking you to protect what the shadow seeks. As long as you remain beyond its reach, we maintain the advantage." Reluctantly, Lyra nodded. The wolf understood strategy, even if the woman chafed at separation from her bonded mate in time of danger. She allowed Elder Gaia to guide her toward a side exit from the amphitheater, casting one last glance at Alexander as he organized the Alpha leaders into a unified fighting force. The sanctuary beneath the North Tower was ancient, its stone walls inscribed with protective runes that glowed with a soft blue light. Elder Gaia sealed the heavy iron door behind them, muttering incantations that caused the runes to flare brightly before settling into a steady pulse. "We should be safe here," she assured Lyra. The sanctuary was built during the reign of Alaric himself, designed specifically to shield vessels of the Silver bloodline from unwanted spiritual influence. "While others fight and die outside," Lyra said bitterly, "this isn't right, Elder. I should be with Alexander." "The king knows what he's doing, child." Elder Gaia settled her ancient frame onto a stone bench, her ashwood staff across her knees. "The shadow cannot be defeated by conventional means. Its physical manifestations, these shadow beasts, are merely projections of its will, designed to create chaos and weaken our defenses." "So what happens when those defenses fail?" Lyra demanded. "When it breaks through to this sanctuary? When it finally claims what it believes is owed?" Elder Gaia regarded her thoughtfully. "That, my dear, depends entirely on you, and on what you choose to become in the face of such a moment." "What do you mean?" Lord Thornwald spoke of balance, the true purpose of the Heros Gamos. But balance is not a state one simply achieves and maintains. It is a constant process of adjustment, of choice, of willful harmony between opposing forces. The ancient werewolf leaned forward, her eyes intense. "You already contain two such forces, your human spirit and the king's wolf. Adding a third creates not just complexity, but opportunity." "Opportunity for what?" "For transformation." Elder Gaia's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Not into a vessel controlled by the shadow, nor into a simple werewolf with a borrowed wolf spirit, but into something new, something unprecedented, a true bridge between worlds." Lyra stared at the elder, a strange sensation building in her chest, not fear, but a kind of recognition, as if some deep part of her had always known this was her destiny. The wolf within her stirred, pressing against the boundaries of her consciousness, not with aggression, but with curiosity, with something almost like anticipation. "You've known this all along," Lyra realized. "You and Lord Thornwald both. That's why you arranged my marriage to Alexander, why you performed the blood moon ritual. Not just to save him from the curse, but to prepare me for this transformation." Elder Gaia neither confirmed nor denied the accusation. "The paths of fate are rarely straight, child. Sometimes we must walk in darkness before we find the light." Before Lyra could press for more answers, a tremendous crash echoed from beyond the sanctuary door. The protective runes flared vividly, then dimmed as if struggling against some opposing force. Another crash followed, then another, each impact causing the runes to flicker more erratically. "They've found us," Elder Gaia said grimly, rising to her feet with surprising agility for one so ancient. She gripped her ashwood staff, which began to glow with the same blue light as the protective runes. "Prepare yourself, child. The moment of choice approaches faster than we anticipated." The door to the sanctuary shuddered under another impact, the metal beginning to warp and buckle. Through the growing gaps, Lyra glimpsed writhing darkness punctuated by silver eyes, dozens of them, glowing with hungry anticipation. The shadow that walks had returned, and this time it had brought an army. Retry Ka Viet Tiep, Part 2. Theodan E. Voidodai minimum 6,000 words, maximum 7,000 words. Kumsu Jungdo Gek Ngang, Jukek chapter orchestrated narrative continuation, balancing plot advancement with character development. Let me continue writing Part 2 of Fallen King Rising Queen, based on the outline, maintaining the cinematic prose style, and focusing on emotional intensity. I'll make sure the content is optimized for a male audience over 60 years old in the U.S. I need to pick up where I left off with the attack on the sanctuary beneath the North Tower. I'm currently in the middle of Part 2, with the following key plot points already covered. Lyra and Alexander discovering the truth about the Blood Pact in ancient archives. Lady Winterbloom revealing information about the shadow that walks. The first attack by the shadow entity. Lord Thornwald's arrival and revelation about the true nature of the Pact. The great assembly of Pact leaders where Blackthorn challenges Lyra's legitimacy. The attack on the palace by shadow beasts. Lyra and Elder Gaia in the sanctuary with the Shadow's forces about to break through key elements. I still need to cover in Part 2. The Shadow breaking into the sanctuary. A major confrontation with the Shadow entity. More revelations about Lyra's connection to Thornwald. Continuing development of Lyra and Alexander's relationship. Setting up for the final twist number 4 about Alaric's true identity. The development of Lyra's powers. The writing needs to continue the established tone and pacing, with limited but impactful dialogue. I should ensure it follows the outline structure for Part 2 and creates proper setups for Part 3. The ancient door shuddered one final time before tearing from its hinges with a sound like a dying animal. Metal twisted and stone cracked as darkness flooded into the sanctuary, swirling like liquid night. The protective runes flared desperately, fighting a losing battle against an entity older than the kingdom itself. Elder Gaia planted her staff firmly against the stone floor, her withered frame suddenly radiating power that belied her apparent fragility. "Stay behind me, child," she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. Lyra had no intention of cowering. She summoned the shadow-light claws that had become increasingly responsive to her will, feeling them form with satisfying solidity around her fingers. The wolf within her snarled in anticipation, lending her strength and predatory focus. The darkness coalesced into a dozen humanoid shapes, shadow beasts with limbs too long for their torsos, and heads that seemed to constantly shift between human and animal features. Only their eyes remained constant, pools of liquid silver that reflected nothing and revealed less. They moved with unnatural grace, gliding rather than stepping across the sanctuary floor. "The vessel," they whispered in unison, their voices a discordant chorus that grated against the ear. "The promised one, the doorway between worlds." Elder Gaia raised her staff, blue fire erupting from its gnarled head. "You shall not pass," she declared, her aged voice suddenly resonant with power. "This sanctuary is consecrated against your kind." The lead shadow beast cocked its head at an impossible angle, regarding the ancient werewolf with something like amusement. "Old magic," it acknowledged. "Strong but fading, like you, Elder." It turned its silver gaze to Lyra. "She cannot protect you, Vessel." "None of them can. You were promised to us 3 centuries ago. A debt must be paid." "I never made that promise," Lyra replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I owe you nothing." "Your bloodline made the pact," another shadow beast hissed. "Your ancestors swore the oath. Blood binds. Blood demands. Blood will have its due." They advanced as one, a wave of darkness flowing around Elder Gaia's protective barrier of blue fire. The ancient werewolf chanted frantically, sweat beading on her brow as she fought to maintain the faltering shield. The runes carved into the sanctuary walls pulsed erratically, some darkening entirely as the shadow being's presence corrupted their power. Lyra slashed at the nearest beast with her shadow-like claws. The creature shrieked as her talons tore through its insubstantial form, leaving wounds that leaked not blood, but a strange silvery vapor. It recoiled momentarily, but quickly reformed, its injuries closing like smoke rejoining itself. "The vessel fights," it said, sounding almost pleased. "Good. Strength will be needed for what comes." Another beast lunged at Lyra from the side. She spun to meet it, the wolf's reflexes guiding her movements. Her claws raked across its face, dispersing the darkness where its eyes should have been. It wailed, a sound like metal scraping against stone, before dissolving entirely. Hope flared briefly in Lyra's chest. They could be destroyed. But for each shadow beast she dispatched, 2 more seemed to form from the swirling darkness that now filled half the sanctuary. Elder Gaia's barrier contracted steadily as her strength waned, the blue fire dimming with each passing moment. "I cannot hold them much longer," the ancient werewolf gasped. "The shadow has grown too powerful." As if in response to her words, the darkness beyond the faltering barrier shifted, compressing and coalescing into a larger figure that towered over the shadow beasts. The entity that stepped forward was both more and less substantial than its minions, a perfect humanoid silhouette cut from the very fabric of night, yet with a presence that seemed to bend reality around it. Its silver eyes were not merely reflective like those of its servants, but luminous with an inner radiance that spoke of consciousness and terrible, ancient intelligence. The shadow that walks had arrived in its true form. "Vessel," it said, its voice no longer a whisper, but a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate in Lyra's very bones. "The time of fulfillment is at hand." Elder Gaia's barrier collapsed in a shower of blue sparks. The ancient werewolf fell to her knees, her staff clattering to the stone floor. The shadow beast surged forward, surrounding Lyra in a circle of writhing darkness. She slashed desperately with her claws, dispersing one, then another, but there were simply too many. Cold tendrils of shadow wrapped around her arms, her legs, her throat, immobilizing her despite her frantic struggles. The wolf within her howled in fury and fear, its power flaring through her limbs in golden pulses that momentarily drove back the darkness before being overwhelmed once more. The main entity glided forward, silver eyes fixed on Lyra with hypnotic intensity. "You fight what you do not understand," it said. "I am not your enemy, Vessel. I am your completion, your purpose. I choose my own purpose," Lyra spat, still struggling against the shadow bonds. "Do you?" The entity's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. "Or do you merely react to the choices others have made for you? The council that arranged your marriage, the king who bound his wolf to your soul, the elders who hid the truth of your heritage." It moved closer, its face, or the suggestion of a face within the darkness, mere inches from Lyra's. "I, at least, offer honesty. I need you as much as you need me." "I don't need you," Lyra insisted, though uncertainty crept into her voice. "I'm not empty anymore. I have Alexander's wolf." "A temporary solution to a permanent condition." The entity reached out, one shadowy hand hovering just above Lyra's cheek without quite touching her. "The wolf is a poor substitute for what you were meant to contain. It struggles even now, a fish out of water, gasping for the ocean of its true host." Within her, Lyra felt the wolf's response, not denial, but a complicated emotion that suggested the entity's words contained at least a grain of truth. The wolf had adapted to her as its vessel, but the arrangement was not ideal for either of them. It missed Alexander, its true partner. And despite the strength it lent her, Lyra remained acutely aware that she was borrowing something that didn't truly belong to her. "You see the truth of it," the shadow continued, sensing her doubt. "The wolf will eventually return to its rightful host, leaving you empty once more. But I offer a permanent solution, a true partnership. Together, we could be something unprecedented, neither fully human nor fully spirit, but a bridge between worlds. Isn't that what you've always wanted? To belong somewhere, to have purpose, to be more than the wolfless omega that everyone pitied?" Its words struck a chord deep within Lyra. All her life, she had been defined by what she lacked, a wolf spirit of her own. She had lived on the margins, tolerated but never truly accepted, her value determined by others who saw her only in terms of her deficiency. Even her current position as Alexander's queen stemmed not from her own merits, but from her convenience as a vessel. The shadow sensed her wavering resolve. "I can give you power beyond imagining," it pressed, "sight beyond the veil, knowledge of realms no mortal has glimpsed, and most importantly, identity, a self no longer defined by absence, but by unique presence." "At what price?" Lyra managed, fighting the hypnotic pull of the entity's words. "Merely access to your world through your senses. the ability to experience physical reality after centuries of isolation beyond the veil. The silver eyes seemed to soften. Is that so terrible a bargain? Before Lyra could respond, a deafening crash shook the sanctuary as the main entrance, not the one the shadow beasts had destroyed, but a larger doorway on the opposite wall, exploded inward in a shower of stone and metal. Golden light flooded the chamber, driving back the darkness momentarily as Alexander Ravenwood charged through the breach, his ceremonial sword blazing with enchanted fire. "Lyra!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the shadow entity's hypnotic influence like a physical blow. The wolf within her responded instantly to its true master's presence, surging with renewed strength. Golden light pulsed from Lyra's skin, burning away the shadow tendrils that bound her. She dropped to the floor as the entity recoiled, its silver eyes narrowing in frustration. "The bondmate," it hissed, "always interfering." Alexander wasn't alone. Lord Thornwald followed close behind him, wielding a spear of what appeared to be pure moonlight. Together, they carved a path through the shadow beasts, their weapons more effective than Lyra's claws had been, dispersing the creatures into wisps of rapidly dissipating darkness. "The balance is incomplete," the main entity declared, its form beginning to destabilize as more werewolf warriors poured into the sanctuary, driving back its minions. "But this changes nothing, Vessel. The pact remains. The debt must be paid. I will return when you are ready to embrace your true purpose." Its silver eyes locked with Lyra's one final time. "Consider my words. Ask the wolf within you if I speak truth." With that, the shadow that walks dissolved into a swirling vortex of darkness that rapidly contracted to a single point before vanishing entirely. Its minions followed, melting into the stone floor or dissipating into the air until nothing remained of their presence save the chill that lingered in the sanctuary. Alexander reached Lyra in 3 long strides, gathering her into his arms with a ferocity that spoke of desperate fear. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, golden flecks dancing in his eyes as the proximity to his wolf stirred the connection between them. "No," Lyra assured him, though her limbs trembled with reaction now that the immediate danger had passed. "Elder Gaia protected me until her strength failed." Alexander looked to where the ancient werewolf still knelt on the stone floor, her face ashen with exhaustion. Lord Thornwald was already at her side, supporting her frail form with gentle hands that belied his warrior's bearing. "The entity spoke to you," Thornwald said, his ice-blue eyes fixed on Lyra with unsettling intensity. "What did it say?" Lyra hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. The shadow's words had struck deeper than she cared to admit, resonating with insecurities she had carried her entire life. And its claims about the wolf's eventual return to Alexander raised questions she wasn't prepared to face. "It spoke of completion," she said finally, "of partnership rather than possession. It claimed that what was written in the original pact has been distorted over time." Thornwald's expression remained carefully neutral, though something flickered in his eyes, confirmation, perhaps, or concern. "The shadow is ancient and clever," he said. "It will use elements of truth to weave a more compelling deception." "But was it lying?" Lyra pressed. "About the original intent of the pact? About what I'm meant to become?" A strange silence fell over the sanctuary. Alexander's arms tightened almost imperceptibly around Lyra, while Thornwald and Elder Gaia exchanged a glance laden with unspoken meaning. "Not entirely," Elder Gaia admitted finally, her voice weak but steady. "The original pact did indeed envision a more balanced arrangement than what later generations attempted to enforce, but the shadow's nature is fundamentally self-serving. It seeks influence in our world for its own purposes, not for any benevolent sharing of knowledge or power." "What purposes?" Alexander demanded. "That," said Thornwald grimly, "is the question that has concerned those of us who know the true history for generations. The records are deliberately vague on that point, perhaps because Alaric himself did not fully understand what he was bargaining with." Alexander helped Lyra to her feet, keeping one arm protectively around her waist. "This sanctuary is compromised," he said.
surveying the damage. "We need to move to a more defensible position while we determine our next steps." "The palace itself may not be secure," Thornwald warned. "The shadow beasts infiltrated multiple levels before we contained them. And we have another problem. General Blackthorn and his Eastern Territory forces have withdrawn from the city." Alexander's expression darkened. "Withdrawn? In the middle of an attack?" The moment the shadow entities appeared, he gathered his warriors and departed, claiming tactical necessity, Thornwald confirmed. Lady Eleanor and several other court officials left with him. "A strategic retreat," Lyra said softly, "or the next phase of whatever they're planning." "Either way, it confirms what we suspected," Alexander said grimly. "Blackthorn is involved in this conspiracy, though I still find it hard to believe he acts alone." "He doesn't," Elder Gaia said, struggling to her feet with Thornwald's assistance. "The power required to summon shadow beasts in such numbers, to breach the sanctuary's defenses, that comes from knowledge and ability Blackthorn does not possess. He serves someone with far deeper understanding of the old magics." "Lady Eleanor?" Lyra suggested. "She was head of the healing chambers with access to the king during his illness. She could have administered the curse that weakened him." "Possible," Thornwald acknowledged. "But again, she would be a conduit rather than the source. The true architect remains hidden." Alexander shook his head, frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. "Speculation gets us nowhere. We need certainty." He turned to Lyra, his expression softening slightly. "You need rest, and I need to organize our defenses in case the shadow entities return." "I'm fine," Lyra insisted, though in truth, exhaustion pulled at her limbs, and the wolf within her had grown quieter, as if conserving its strength after the confrontation. "We should talk about what happened, about what the shadow said." "Later," Alexander promised. "When we're both thinking more clearly." Thornwald cleared his throat. "If I may suggest, Your Majesties, my private quarters in the northern wing remain secure. They are warded against spiritual intrusion, not as strongly as this sanctuary was, but adequately for temporary refuge." Alexander considered this, then nodded. "Thank you, Lord Thornwald. We accept your offer." As they made their way through the palace corridors, Lyra was struck by the evidence of the recent attack. Tapestries hung in tatters, their once vibrant colors leached away as if the shadow beasts had fed on the very essence of the dyes. Scorch marks scarred stone walls where defenders had used fire to drive back the darkness. The air itself felt thinner somehow, charged with residual energies that raised goosebumps on exposed skin. Thornwald's quarters occupied an entire section of the northern wing, a suite of rooms furnished with austere elegance that reflected their owner's practical nature. Heavy bookshelves lined the walls of the main chamber, filled with leather-bound volumes whose titles suggested subjects ranging from military history to ancient metaphysics. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel carved with runes similar to those that had protected the sanctuary. "Please, make yourselves comfortable," Thornwald said, gesturing to well-worn but high-quality furnishings arranged around the fireplace. "I will have food brought, and then we can discuss our next steps." Alexander helped Elder Gaia to a cushioned chair before turning to Thornwald. "I need to check on the palace defenses first, ensure the shadow beasts haven't left any surprises behind. I won't be long." Thornwald nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty. I should assist as well." He glanced at Lyra. "My personal guard will remain at the door. No one will disturb you." After they had gone, Lyra sank onto a couch near the fireplace, the events of the past hours catching up with her in a wave of bone-deep weariness. Elder Gaia watched her from the adjacent chair, her ancient eyes holding a mixture of concern and calculation that made Lyra uneasy. "The shadow spoke to you of partnership," the elder said without preamble, "of completion, and its words resonated with you." It wasn't a question. Lyra stiffened, suddenly alert despite her exhaustion. "You sound very certain of that." "I have guided 3 vessels before you," Elder Gaia replied simply. Each faced the same temptation, the promise of purpose, of unique identity, after a lifetime defined by lack. "And what happened to them?" Lyra asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. They succumbed. Elder Gaia's voice held no judgment, only a deep sadness. Not immediately, not completely, but gradually the shadow's influence eroded their sense of self until they were no longer fully human, no longer in control of their own destiny. And they died. Eventually. The elder's gnarled fingers traced absent patterns on the arm of her chair. The human vessel was never meant to contain such power indefinitely. The strain proves too much, even for those of the silver bloodline. So I'm doomed either way, Lyra concluded bitterly. If the shadow possesses me, I die. If Alexander's wolf returns to him, I'm left empty again, vulnerable to the shadow's next attempt. Unless you find the balance Lord Thornwald spoke of, Elder Gaia suggested. The true Hieros Gamos, neither possession nor emptiness, but harmony between opposing forces.
And how exactly am I supposed to achieve that? Lyra demanded, frustration breaking through her usual reserve. No one seems willing to give me straight answers about this balance, this sacred marriage, just riddles and half-truths and cryptic warnings. Elder Gaia sighed heavily. Because the full truth is dangerous, child. Knowledge shapes reality. Understanding changes the one who understands. There are some revelations that, once given, cannot be taken back. I'm tired of being protected from the truth, Lyra said firmly. My entire life has been shaped by secrets others kept from me, about my heritage, about my purpose, about the bargain made centuries before my birth. I deserve to know what I'm facing. The ancient werewolf studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her worth against some internal measure. Finally, she nodded. Very well, but remember that you asked for this knowledge. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to little more than a whisper despite the privacy of their surroundings. The true Hieros Gamos requires 3 spirits in perfect equilibrium: human, wolf, and shadow, not fighting for control, but working in concert, each contributing its unique strengths to create something greater than the sum of its parts. That sounds theoretically possible, Lyra said cautiously, but practically impossible. The wolf belongs to Alexander. The shadow is an alien entity with its own agenda. How could such disparate forces ever achieve harmony? Through the one element all 3 have in common, Elder Gaia replied. You, Lyra Silverstone, your human spirit, your consciousness, your will. You are the vessel, the mediator, the focal point through which the other forces must be channeled and balanced. Me? Lyra shook her head in disbelief. I'm just a wolfless omega from a disgraced lineage. I have no special powers, no training in the old magics, no— You are far more than you know, Elder Gaia interrupted, her eyes suddenly fierce. Your bloodline is ancient and powerful. Your mother was not just any handmaiden, but a direct descendant of the Silver Wolves, the original shapeshifters who made pacts with spirit entities long before Alaric the Great unified the territories. This revelation stopped Lyra mid-protest. My mother? But I never knew. She kept the knowledge from you to protect you, Elder Gaia explained. The silver bloodline has always produced 2 types of offspring. Those with the strongest connection to wolf spirits, who become powerful alphas, and those with no connection at all, who become potential vessels for other entities. Your mother hoped you would be the former, but when it became clear you were wolfless, she did everything in her power to hide you from those who would use you as a doorway for the shadow. Lyra struggled to process this flood of new information. And my father? Was he truly disgraced, or was that another deception? Elder Gaia's expression softened. General Silverstone was a good man caught in forces beyond his understanding. He loved your mother deeply, and you as well. His disgrace was real enough, though the reasons were more complex than simple treason. Her ancient eyes grew distant with memory. He discovered too much about the conspiracy surrounding the shadow, about those who sought to harness its power. When he could not be silenced or bought, they orchestrated his fall from grace. Blackthorn, Lyra guessed, among others. Elder Gaia nodded. The conspiracy spans generations. with new actors replacing old ones as time passes, but always pursuing the same goal: control of the shadow's power through control of its vessel. A new thought struck Lyra. "Lord Thornwald," she said slowly. "He knew my mother. He recognized me immediately."
"There's more to that connection than he's admitted, isn't there?"
Something like discomfort crossed the elder's ancient features. "That is not my secret to reveal," she said carefully. "Lord Thornwald has his own tale to tell when he deems the time right." Before Lyra could press further, the door opened to admit a servant bearing a tray of food and drink. The interruption broke the intense atmosphere that had built between them, and by the time they were alone again, Elder Gaia had retreated into tired silence, her momentary openness gone. Lyra didn't push. Her mind was already overwhelmed with revelations, with implications that stretched from her own identity to the future of the kingdom. She picked at the food without tasting it, her thoughts circling endlessly around the choices before her and the forces arrayed on all sides. The shadow that walks offered partnership, but at an unknown cost. Alexander offered protection, but temporary shelter for a wolf that must eventually return to its true host. The conspiracy led by Blackthorn and others sought to control her as a vessel for their own ambitions. And somewhere in this tangled web of ancient pacts and modern politics lay the truth about her heritage, her purpose, and her potential future. By the time Alexander returned, the sun had set, and Thornwald's quarters were lit only by the fire and a few scattered candles. Elder Gaia had dozed off in her chair, exhaustion finally claiming her, despite her evident determination to remain alert. Lyra still sat by the fireplace, watching the flames and trying to make sense of everything she had learned. Alexander moved quietly to join her, his face bearing the marks of strain and recent battle. A fresh cut marked his cheekbone, already healing with a werewolf's supernatural speed. He sank onto the couch beside her, with a barely suppressed groan. "The palace is secure for now," he reported, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Elder Gaia. "No trace remains of the shadow beasts, though the damage they caused will take weeks to repair." "And Blackthorn?" Lyra asked. "Gone, along with the entirety of the Eastern Territory delegation and several key members of the court." Alexander's mouth tightened. "Reports from our scouts suggest they're heading east toward Blackthorn's ancestral stronghold in the Iron Mountains." "Preparing for open rebellion," Lyra concluded. "So it would seem." Alexander rubbed a hand across his face, a rare gesture of weariness he allowed few to see. Though why now, after 15 years of apparent loyalty, remains unclear. Something has changed in the equation, something beyond the blood moon and our binding ritual. "Perhaps it's me," Lyra said softly. "Elder Gaia told me more about my heritage while you were gone, about the silver bloodline and its significance."
"My mother was trying to hide me from those who would use me as a vessel for the shadow." Alexander nodded slowly. "That aligns with what Lord Thornwald shared with me. Your bloodline is special, Lyra, one of the oldest connected to the spirit realm. The wolfless members of your line have always been sought after for their unique capacity. Capacity to be possessed by otherworldly entities," Lyra said with a bitter edge. "To be used as doorways and then discarded when the strain proves too much. How flattering." Alexander's hand found hers, warm and solid against her cold fingers. "That's how they see you," he acknowledged. "As a tool, a vessel, a means to an end. But that's not what you are." "Then what am I?" Lyra asked, the question emerging more vulnerable than she'd intended. Alexander turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting the firelight with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are Lyra Silverstone," he said with quiet certainty, "Queen of Lunarfall. Partner to my wolf in ways I'm only beginning to understand, and much more than anyone, including yourself, has yet realized." The simple declaration, delivered with absolute conviction, touched something deep within Lyra. The wolf inside her stirred in response, a warm presence that seemed to agree with its human host's assessment. "The shadow offered me completion," she admitted, watching Alexander's reaction carefully. It said the wolf is only a temporary solution to my emptiness, that eventually it will return to you, leaving me vulnerable once more. Alexander's expression darkened slightly, but he didn't deny the entity's claim. The wolf is indeed drawn to return to me, he confirmed. I can feel it even now, straining against the bonds of the ritual that placed it within you. But that doesn't mean you would be left empty. What do you mean? Alexander hesitated, choosing his words with obvious care. Lord Thornwald believes, and Elder Gaia seems to concur, that the time you've spent hosting my wolf has changed you, prepared you in ways that might allow for something unprecedented. The balance they keep talking about, Lyra said. The true Hieros Gamos. Yes. Alexander's grip on her hand tightened slightly. Not possession by the shadow, not emptiness, but a third path, conscious partnership with both wolf and shadow energies, channeled and controlled through your human will. Is that even possible? Theoretically. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, though apparently no one has successfully managed it in the 300 years since the original pact was made. The closest anyone came was 70 years ago, during my father's reign, but the vessel died, Lyra finished for him, like all the others. Not immediately, Alexander clarified. She maintained the balance for almost a year before the strain became too much. In that time, she demonstrated abilities beyond anything seen before or since: communication across the veil, manipulation of shadow and light, healing powers that bordered on miraculous. Lyra thought of the shadow-light claws that now formed at her command, of the way Alexander's wolf had gradually adapted to her as its vessel, granting her enhanced senses and reflexes. Were these merely the beginning of what she might become if she achieved the true balance? And what happens to you in this scenario? She asked, the question that had been lurking at the back of her mind finally emerging. If your wolf returns to you but I somehow maintain a connection to it while also establishing a limited partnership with the shadow, where does that leave us? Our bond? Something vulnerable flashed across Alexander's features before his regal composure reasserted itself. The bond would remain, he said carefully, though its nature would necessarily change. We would be connected still, but differently, not as vessel and source, but as separate entities linked by shared essence. And would that be acceptable to you? Lyra pressed, uncertain why his answer suddenly mattered so much. Alexander's gaze dropped briefly to their joined hands before returning to her face. The arrangement was never meant to be permanent, he reminded her gently. My wolf needs to return to me eventually. The curse that afflicted me has been held at bay by our bonding ritual, but not cured. For both our sakes, we must find a more sustainable solution. It was the diplomatic answer of a king, not the honest response of a man. Lyra felt a pang of disappointment she couldn't entirely explain, even to herself. Over the past weeks, something had shifted between them, the arrangement of political convenience evolving into something more complex, more personal. She had grown accustomed to the wolf's presence within her, to the connection it created between them, to the sense of belonging she had never known before. Of course, she said, withdrawing her hand from his with careful casualness. The kingdom's needs must come first. Alexander caught her retreating fingers, holding them with unexpected gentleness. Lyra, he said, her name emerging almost as a sigh. I didn't mean... A sharp knock at the door interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Elder Gaia startled awake in her chair, blinking in momentary confusion as Alexander rose to answer the summons, his expression a mixture of frustration and resignation at the interruption. Lord Thornwald stood in the corridor, his face grave. Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty, but a messenger has arrived from the Eastern Territories. General Blackthorn has issued a formal declaration denouncing your rule and proclaiming the formation of a separate kingdom under his leadership. Alexander's posture stiffened. Open rebellion, then. Worse, Thornwald continued grimly. The declaration claims that you are unfit to rule due to your unnatural bond with the Queen, a bond they describe as corruption of the royal bloodline by dark forces from beyond the veil. They're using the Shadow's interest in Lyra as proof that she is a threat to the kingdom rather than its salvation. Political manipulation, Alexander said dismissively. Blackthorn twists the truth to serve his ambitions. Perhaps, Thornwald acknowledged, but his message resonates with those who fear the old magics, who remember only the disasters caused by previous attempts to harness the Shadow's power. Several of the neutral pacts have already pledged allegiance to his cause. Alexander cursed under his breath, a rare break in his regal composure. How long before he marches on Wolfhaven? Days, not weeks, Thornwald estimated. He'll want to capitalize on the fear generated by the Shadow Beast's attack, and... He hesitated, glancing at Lyra with an unreadable expression. There's one more thing. The declaration specifically names Lord Thornwald, myself, as a traitor to the werewolf kind for harboring the abomination that walks in human form. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. Me, she whispered. He means me. He means both of us, Thornwald corrected, a strange emotion flickering in his ice-blue eyes. The time for half-truths has passed, I fear. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as if preparing for battle. Queen Lyra, there is something you must know. Something I should have told you from the moment we met. Alexander's expression shifted to one of wary alertness. Lord Thornwald, is this the right moment for such revelations? With Blackthorn's armies gathering? It may be the only moment we have, Thornwald interrupted, his gaze never leaving Lyra's face. And she deserves to know the truth before she faces what comes next. Elder Gaia had risen from her chair, her ancient face a mask of concern. Thornwald, she warned, consider carefully. Some secrets are kept for good reason. And some secrets destroy us from within, Thornwald countered. I've carried this one long enough. He moved to stand directly before Lyra, his imposing frame seeming to diminish somehow as he spoke his next words. I knew your mother, Ilaria, not simply as a courtier or ally, but as the woman I loved beyond reason or sanity. And you, Lyra Silverstone, are my daughter. The words landed like physical blows, each one shifting the foundations of Lyra's understanding of herself and her place in the world. Her throat constricted, making speech impossible as she stared at the Northern Alpha's weathered face, suddenly seeing it with new eyes, noting the shape of his jaw, so similar to her own, the set of his eyes, the way his hands moved when he spoke. That's not possible, she finally managed. My father was General Silverstone, everyone knows that. Jared Silverstone was a good man who loved your mother and raised you as his own, Thornwald acknowledged, pain evident in his voice. But you were conceived before their marriage, during a brief, forbidden relationship between a Northern Alpha and a Silver bloodline handmaiden. When Ilaria discovered she was with child, we both knew the danger you would face if your true parentage became known. Why? Lyra demanded, finding her voice at last. Why would it matter who my father was? Thornwald's expression grew even more somber. Because of who I am. Not just Lord Thornwald of the Northern Territories, but the last direct male descendant of Alaric the Great, the king who made the original pact with the Shadow. The silence that followed this revelation was absolute. Even Elder Gaia seemed shocked, her ancient eyes wide with surprise, that suggested this particular secret had been kept even from her. The bloodlines, Alexander said slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. Your father's and your mother's, combined in you. That's what makes you different from previous vessels, isn't it? That's why the Shadow is so determined to claim you specifically. Thornwald nodded grimly. A vessel of the Silver bloodline, directly descended from the king who made the original pact. No such combination has existed in 300 years. The potential power of such a vessel. He shook his head, unable to complete the thought. Power that Blackthorn and his conspirators wish to control, Alexander concluded, and now I understand why they've moved against us so openly, why the timing of their rebellion coincides with the Shadow's return. They know what Lyra truly is.
as does the shadow itself, Thornwald confirmed, which is why it will not stop seeking her, why it offered partnership rather than simple possession. It recognizes in Lyra the perfect vessel it was promised centuries ago, one capable of maintaining the balance between worlds without being consumed by the process. Lyra stared at the man who claimed to be her father, emotions warring within her. Shock, disbelief, anger at the deception, and beneath it all, a strange sense of recognition, as if some part of her had always known the truth. The wolf inside her stirred restlessly, sensing her turmoil, but unable to comfort her in this moment of profound personal revelation. "Why tell me now?" she asked finally. "After all these years of silence, why reveal yourself when war stands at our doorstep?" Thornwald's weathered face reflected a lifetime of regret. "Because the choice you face requires full understanding of who you are and what you might become. The true Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage of human, wolf, and shadow, has never been successfully achieved because no vessel has had the heritage to sustain it. Until you. So I'm just another kind of vessel after all," Lyra said bitterly. "Special because of bloodlines I knew nothing about, valuable for what I might contain rather than who I am." "No." Thornwald's voice cracked with emotion. "You are Lyra, brave and stubborn and fierce in ways that have nothing to do with heritage and everything to do with the woman you've become, despite the challenges life placed before you. I reveal your bloodline not to define you by it, but to give you the knowledge you need to choose your own path forward." Alexander, who had been watching this exchange with carefully neutral expression, finally spoke. "What exactly are you suggesting, Lord Thornwald? That Lyra should attempt the true Hieros Gamos now, before Blackthorn's forces reach Wolfhaven?" "I suggest that she consider all options available to her," Thornwald replied carefully, "including those that might change the nature of the conflict entirely." "You mean using the Shadow's power against Blackthorn?" Lyra said, cutting through the diplomatic phrasing. "Becoming what they fear in order to defeat them." Thornwald neither confirmed nor denied this interpretation. "I mean claiming your heritage and your potential on your own terms, not those dictated by ancient pacts or modern conspiracies." Elder Gaia stepped forward, her ancient face grave with concern. "Such a path carries immense risk," she warned. "The balance required for the true Hieros Gamos is precarious at best, impossible at worst. Even with your unique heritage, the strain could destroy you." "As could Blackthorn's armies, or the Shadow's next attempt at possession," Thornwald countered. "There are no safe choices left, only different forms of danger." Alexander moved to stand beside Lyra, his presence solid and reassuring despite the turmoil of revelations. "Whatever you decide," he said quietly, "you will not face it alone. The wolf within you is still mine, as I am still its. Our fates remain bound together, regardless of bloodlines or ancient prophecies." Lyra looked from Alexander to Thornwald to Elder Gaia, these three powerful figures whose lives and destinies had become so inexplicably entangled with her own. The wolf within her had gone quiet, as if sensing the gravity of the moment and respecting her need to make this choice as herself, not influenced by its borrowed strength. "I need time," she said finally. "Not much. I understand the urgency of our situation, but enough to process everything I've learned tonight. By morning, I will have my answer." Thornwald nodded, respect evident in his ice-blue eyes. Her eyes, she now realized with a jolt of recognition. "Of course," he said simply. "It could not be otherwise." As the others prepared to leave her alone with her thoughts, Alexander hesitated at the door. "Lyra," he said softly, "before, when we were interrupted, I wanted to say that while the kingdom's needs must indeed come first, I have discovered something unexpected in our time together." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "Whatever path you choose, know that my concern for you extends far beyond political alliance or magical bond. It has become personal." With that admission hanging in the air between them, he withdrew, leaving Lyra to contemplate not only the weight of her heritage and the choices before her, but also the unexpected complication of feelings that had developed between a king and his reluctant bride, feelings that now faced their greatest test as shadow and light converged on the kingdom of Lunarfall. Dawn broke over Wolfhaven like a soldier's blade, sharp, cold, and promising battle. Mist clung to the valley floor, shrouding the ancient city in veils of silver that parted reluctantly before the advancing sun. From her position on the highest tower of the palace, Lyra Silverstone watched this daily conquest of darkness by light with new understanding. The eternal dance between shadow and illumination was no longer merely poetic to her. It was personal, a reflection of the forces that now vied for equilibrium within her own being. She had not slept. How could she? With revelations cascading through her mind like avalanches. The truth of her parentage, the significance of her dual bloodlines, the choice that now lay before her, heavy with consequence not just for herself, but for an entire kingdom. The wolf within her had grown restless through the night, pacing the boundaries of her consciousness. It sensed something approaching, not just Blackthorn's armies gathering beyond the eastern hills, but a convergence of energies, a culmination of forces set in motion centuries before her birth. "Have you decided?" Alexander's voice came from behind her, quiet but carrying easily in the still morning air. Lyra didn't turn, not immediately. She sensed rather than saw him approach, his presence announcing itself through the wolf's heightened awareness of its true master. "Yes," she said finally, turning to face the man who was her husband in name and bond, if not yet in heart. "Though I doubt anyone will be entirely pleased with my choice." Alexander stood at a respectful distance, dressed not in ceremonial finery, but in practical battle leathers, a sword at his hip and his father's dagger sheathed at his chest. His face showed the strain of a night spent in counsel and preparation, but his eyes were clear, focused entirely on her. "It is not our place to be pleased," he said, "only to respect your decision, whatever it may be." Lyra studied him, noting the careful neutrality of his expression, the way he held himself, ready for disappointment, yet determined to honor her autonomy. In the weeks since their hasty marriage, Alexander Ravenwood had surprised her repeatedly. The cold, imposing king of her imagination had revealed depths of honor, compassion, and unexpected vulnerability that had gradually reshaped her understanding of him. "I will attempt the true hieros gamos," she said finally. "Not as Blackthorn's puppet, not as the Shadow's vessel, not even as a solution to your curse, but as myself, Lyra Silverstone, claiming my heritage and choosing my fate." Something flickered in Alexander's eyes. Relief? Concern? She couldn't quite identify it before his regal composure reasserted itself. "Lord Thornwald will be gratified," he said carefully. "My father, you mean?" The words still felt strange on her tongue, foreign yet somehow right. "Yes." Alexander inclined his head slightly, "though I notice you did not seek his counsel before making your decision." "I sought no one's counsel," Lyra confirmed. "This choice had to be mine alone." She moved closer to him, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body in the cool morning air. "But that doesn't mean I made it without consideration for others." Alexander's composure slipped just slightly, a fleeting vulnerability crossing his features. "Lyra, A horn blast from the eastern watchtowers cut through the moment, its urgent tone signaling not the expected approach of Blackthorn's army, but something else. Something that had the guards shouting in alarm and pointing toward the horizon. Alexander moved swiftly to the parapet, Lyra at his side. Together they looked east, beyond the city walls to where the mist was rapidly dispersing, driven away not by the rising sun, but by an unnatural darkness that spread across the landscape like spilled ink. The shadow beasts had returned, but not in dozens as before. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of the entities flowed across the hills like a living tide of darkness, their silver eyes gleaming with cold hunger. "They come in force," Alexander said grimly. "Far more than we faced in the sanctuary." "The shadow that walks grows impatient," Lyra observed, feeling the wolf within her bristle at the approaching threat. "It's done waiting for me to make my choice." Or Blackthorn has found a way to control the shadow entities, to use them as the vanguard for his assault. Alexander turned to her, urgency in his every movement. "Either way, we must accelerate our plans. If you truly intend to attempt the Hieros Gamos, it must be now, before that darkness reaches our walls." Lyra nodded, a strange calm settling over her despite the approaching danger. "Then let us begin. Where is Lord Thornwald? We'll need the catalyst he possesses." In the ritual chamber beneath the throne room, Elder Gaia is with him, preparing the necessary elements for the ceremony. Alexander hesitated, then reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "Lyra, if this doesn't work—" "It will," she interrupted, certainty flooding her voice. "I don't know how I know, but I do. This is what I was born for, Alexander, not to be used or possessed or controlled, but to create balance where there has only been conflict." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Then who am I to doubt the word of a queen?" Together they descended from the tower into the heart of the palace, passing guards rushing to their stations and servants hurrying to secure the keep against the approaching shadow tide. The atmosphere was tense but disciplined, a testament to Alexander's leadership. These were people prepared for battle, not panicked by the prospect. The ritual chamber lay behind the throne room, accessed through a hidden passage that opened only to the king's touch upon a specific stone in the great fireplace. Unlike the sanctuary that had been breached the previous day, this chamber had never been recorded in the palace archives, its existence known only to the monarch and their most trusted advisors. The circular room was carved from the living rock of the mountain, its walls inscribed with runes and symbols older than the kingdom itself. No windows admitted natural light. Instead, 13 eternal flames burned in silver sconces, positioned precisely around the perimeter. At the center of the chamber stood a raised dais of white marble, upon which rested an altar of the same material, its surface polished to mirror brightness. Lord Thornwald and Elder Gaia awaited them, along with a third figure Lyra hadn't expected, Lady Victoria Winterbloom, the ancient practitioner of the old magics, who had first revealed to them the truth about the blood pact. "The pieces assemble themselves," Lady Winterbloom said by way of greeting, her ice-blue eyes assessing Lyra with unnerving intensity. "The vessel has made her choice." "Not vessel," Lyra corrected firmly. "Queen, daughter, woman. I am not an empty container to be filled, but a person choosing her destiny." Lady Winterbloom's withered lips curved in what might have been approval. "Well said. Intent matters in the old magics. Names matter even more. Remember that in the moments to come." Lord Thornwald stepped forward, the crystal vial containing the catalyst clutched in one hand. In the chamber's muted light, the substance within seemed more alive than ever, swirling with patterns of darkness and radiance that mirrored the shadow-light claws Lyra had manifested since the binding ritual. "Daughter," he said, the word emerging with evident emotion, "you have chosen a difficult path, but one that honors both your bloodlines. I am proud, though I have no right to claim such paternal feeling after so many years of absence." "We will speak of the past later," Lyra said, neither accepting nor rejecting his sentiment. "Now we must focus on ensuring there is a future to discuss." Thornwald nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. "Of course, Elder Gaia will guide you through the ritual. She is the only one among us who has witnessed previous attempts at the true Hieros Gamos." The ancient werewolf stepped forward, her gnarled hand resting on her ashwood staff. "The ritual has 3 phases," she explained. "First, the preparation of the vessel. Forgive me, of the mediator," she amended at Lyra's pointed look. "Second, the invocation of the opposing forces. And third, the binding that brings them into balance." "The marking ritual," Alexander said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The claiming bite that we didn't complete during our wedding ceremony." "Precisely," Elder Gaia confirmed, "but enhanced and altered by the presence of the catalyst." She gestured to the vial in Thornwald's hand.
The substance will be applied to your fangs, Your Majesty, before the marking takes place. It will create a conduit through which the three essences, human, wolf, and shadow, can flow into their proper alignment. And the risks? Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer. Elder Gaia didn't soften her response. Total.
If the balance isn't achieved, the competing forces could tear you apart, physically, mentally, spiritually. Even if you survive, you might be left as an empty shell, your consciousness obliterated by the strain. Alexander's hand tightened around Lyra's. There must be another way, he began, but Lyra shook her head. There isn't, she said with quiet certainty. Not with Blackthorn's forces approaching and the shadow growing stronger with each passing moment. We do this now, or we lose everything. A distant rumble shook the palace foundations, as if to emphasize her words. The shadow tide was drawing nearer, testing the ancient defenses of Wolfhaven. We must hurry, Lady Winterbloom urged. The veil between worlds thins as the shadow entities mass. Soon they will breach the outer walls. Lyra released Alexander's hand and stepped onto the dais, moving to stand before the white marble altar. What must I do? She asked Elder Gaia. Remove your outer garments, the ancient werewolf instructed. The ritual requires direct contact between flesh and stone, between the physical and the spiritual realms. Without hesitation, Lyra unfastened her cloak and the lightweight armor beneath it, letting them fall to the floor. She stood in a simple white shift, suddenly aware of the cool air against her skin, of the weight of 4 pairs of eyes upon her, Alexander's with concern, Thornwald's with paternal worry, Elder Gaia's with clinical assessment, and Lady Winterbloom's with something that might have been envy or nostalgia. Lie upon the altar, Elder Gaia continued. On your back, arms at your sides, palms up in the gesture of receptivity. The marble was cold against Lyra's skin as she positioned herself as instructed, forcing herself to breathe evenly despite the chill and the vulnerability of her position. Above her, the chamber's domed ceiling was inscribed with a complex pattern she hadn't noticed before, a map of the stars as they would have appeared during the first blood moon 300 years ago, when Alaric the Great had made his fateful pact. Elder Gaia began to chant in the ancient language of ritual, words that seemed to hang in the air like physical entities vibrating with power. Lady Winterbloom joined her, their voices weaving a complex harmony that made the eternal flames flicker and dance. Lord Thornwald uncapped the crystal vial, the catalyst within pulsing with increased intensity as it responded to the chant. Alexander moved to stand at the head of the altar, looking down at Lyra with an expression she couldn't fully interpret. Concern, yes, but also something deeper, something that made her heart race, despite the solemnity of the moment. "Are you certain?" he asked one final time, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Lyra met his gaze steadily. "I am." He nodded, accepting her decision with the respect of one ruler for another. "Then I am with you, whatever comes." The chanting reached a crescendo, the ancient words now accompanied by gestures from Elder Gaia and Lady Winterbloom that left trails of blue fire in the air. Lord Thornwald approached the altar, the open vial extended before him. "With this catalyst, gathered from the boundary between worlds," he intoned, "we invoke the sacred balance of the true Hieros Gamos. Let what was separated be rejoined. Let what was broken be mended. Let what was promised be fulfilled. Not in subjugation, but in harmony." He tipped the vial, allowing 3 drops of the swirling substance to fall onto Lyra's forehead. The liquid was neither hot nor cold, but something in between, a sensation beyond physical description. It seemed to sink beneath her skin instantly, spreading through her body like branching lightning, connecting pathways she hadn't known existed. Within her, the wolf stirred in recognition, reaching toward this new presence with cautious curiosity rather than alarm. Lyra gasped as her awareness suddenly expanded, as if veils were being stripped away from her perception. The chamber around her remained the same, yet somehow more, colors deeper, sounds richer, the very air alive with currents of energy she had never perceived before. "The preparation is complete," Elder Gaia announced. The mediator's consciousness has been expanded to perceive the spiritual realm. Now we must invoke the opposing forces. Alexander stepped forward, rolling up the sleeve of his right arm. Elder Gaia produced a ceremonial knife of black glass, its edge glinting wickedly in the firelight. Without hesitation, she drew the blade across Alexander's exposed forearm, deep enough that blood welled immediately, rich and dark. "Blood of the Alpha line," she declared, "essence of the wolf that seeks return to its true master." She guided Alexander's bleeding arm to hover above Lyra's face. 3 drops upon the lips, she instructed, to awaken the bond between wolf and human. Alexander positioned his arm carefully, allowing exactly 3 drops of his blood to fall onto Lyra's parted lips. The taste was metallic, primal, alive with a power that made the wolf within her howl in recognition. Golden light flickered beneath her skin, visible through the thin fabric of her shift, as the wolf responded to the essence of its true host. "Now the shadow must be invoked," Lady Winterbloom said, her ancient voice taking on a resonance that filled the chamber. She raised her arms, the sleeves of her robes falling back to reveal skin marked with tattoos in a language long forgotten. "I call upon the entity known as the Shadow that Walks. By the pact made with Alaric the Great, by the blood spilled in covenant, by the promise of the vessel born of dual lineage, I summon you to this sacred space." The eternal flames guttered suddenly, as if a great wind had passed through the sealed chamber. Darkness gathered at the perimeter, coalescing into a shape both familiar and terrifying. The Shadow that Walks, its silver eyes fixed upon Lyra with predatory intensity. "The vessel calls," it said, its voice resonating directly in their minds rather than through the air. The doorway opens. "Not vessel," Lyra corrected, finding her voice despite the power washing over her. "Mediator, partner, equal." The shadow seemed to consider this distinction, its form rippling like smoke in a breeze. "Semantics," it dismissed. "The result is the same. Access to the physical realm through your flesh." "Not unconditional access," Lyra countered, pushing herself up to a sitting position on the altar despite Elder Gaia's sound of protest. "Negotiated access, balanced partnership, or nothing at all." The shadow's silver eyes narrowed. "You presume to dictate terms to me? I who was ancient when your kind still huddled in caves? I who taught Alaric the Great the secrets of the wolf bond. I presume to respect myself enough to demand respect in return," Lyra said firmly. 300 years of vessels used and discarded, of promises broken and power abused. That ends now. With me. A strange sound emanated from the shadow, something that might have been laughter or snarling or both. "Bold, like your father." Its silver gaze shifted briefly to Lord Thornwald. "The bloodline breeds true, it seems." "Enough delay," Elder Gaia interjected. "The external shadows grow stronger with each passing moment. We must complete the ritual before they breach the palace defenses." As if to emphasize her warning, another rumble shook the chamber, stronger than before, accompanied by the distant sound of battle, werewolf howls mingling with the unearthly shrieks of shadow beasts. "The binding," Lady Winterbloom urged. "It must be now." Lord Thornwald approached Alexander, the crystal vial still in his hand, now containing only a few drops of the precious catalyst. "Your fangs, Your Majesty," he instructed. "They must be anointed with the catalyst before the marking can take place." Alexander stepped forward, closing his eyes briefly in concentration. His canine teeth lengthened visibly, becoming the deadly fangs of his wolf form while the rest of him remained human. It was a partial shift that required immense control, a testament to his mastery of his dual nature. Lord Thornwald carefully tipped the vial, allowing the last drops of the catalyst to coat Alexander's extended fangs. The substance clung to them, glowing with an inner light that shifted between silver and gold. "Now," Elder Gaia said, "the marking ritual must be completed. The king must claim his queen not merely as consort, but as spiritual counterpart. The bite must pierce deeply enough to connect with the energies now flowing through her body." Alexander approached the altar where Lyra still sat, her pulse visible in the delicate skin of her throat. His eyes had taken on the golden glow of his wolf aspect, though the rest of his features remained human. The duality of his nature had never been more apparent, man and beast in perfect equilibrium, each aspect enhancing rather than diminishing the other. "This will hurt," he warned softly, "more than a normal claiming bite." "I know," Lyra replied, tilting her head to expose the curve where neck met shoulder, the traditional placement for a werewolf's claiming mark. "Do it." Alexander placed one hand at the back of her neck, supporting her head with surprising gentleness given the gravity of the moment. His other arm circled her waist, drawing her against him in a posture that was both intimate and practical, steadying her for what was to come. "Remember," Elder Gaia cautioned, "the moment of marking is the moment of greatest vulnerability. The shadow will attempt to surge through the opening created by the bite. You must assert your will, Lyra. You must establish the balance before either force can dominate." Lyra nodded, her eyes locked with Alexander's. In that moment, something passed between them that transcended the ritual, the politics, the magical necessity of their union. A recognition, perhaps, or an acknowledgement of what might have been under different circumstances. Then Alexander lowered his head, his breath warm against her skin for a heartbeat before his fangs pierced her flesh. Pain exploded through Lyra's body, white-hot and all-consuming. This was no ordinary claiming bite. The catalyst coating Alexander's fangs acted as a conduit, connecting directly to the energies now swirling within her. She felt the wolf surge forward through that connection, eager to return to its true host, yet reluctant to abandon the vessel it had come to know. Simultaneously, the shadow lunged for the opening, its presence flooding toward her with the force of a tidal wave. Silver light blazing in its eagerness to claim what it believed was rightfully its own. For a terrible moment, Lyra felt herself being torn apart, her consciousness stretched between three competing forces: her own humanity, the wolf's primal power, and the shadow's ancient, alien presence. Each pulled in a different direction. Each demanded dominance. Each threatened to overwhelm and subsume the others. "Balance!" Elder Gaia's voice came to her, as if from a great distance. "Find the center point!" But how? How did one balance forces so fundamentally opposed? How could light and dark, human and beast, physical and spiritual, ever exist in harmony within a single consciousness? In her mind's eye, Lyra suddenly saw herself standing at a crossroads, three paths stretching before her into infinite distance. Down one path ran a great black wolf with golden eyes. Down another moved a figure of pure darkness with silver stars for eyes. The third path was empty, waiting. Understanding bloomed within her. This was not a battle to be won, not a contest where one force must dominate the others. It was a dance, a symphony, a weaving together of disparate elements to create something greater than its individual components. With a supreme effort of will, Lyra reached out, not physically, but with her consciousness, and grasped both wolf and shadow, drawing them toward her, toward the empty path that represented not absence, but possibility. "Not one," she told them, her voice ringing with authority that surprised even herself. "Not three. 1 in 3, 3 in 1. Balance." The wolf snarled, reluctant to relinquish its connection to Alexander, yet unwilling to abandon Lyra entirely. The shadow pulsed with ancient hunger, seeking domination, yet recognizing the potential of true partnership for the first time in centuries. "I name you," Lyra continued, drawing on instinct and heritage and a knowledge that seemed to flow from the very stones of the mountain beneath them. "Wolf of Alexander, I name you guardian of the physical realm, protector of flesh and blood, bridge between human and beast." The wolf's golden eyes widened, its posture shifting from resistance to attention as the naming ritual activated magics older than the kingdom itself. "Shadow that walks, I name you voyager beyond the veil, bearer of wisdom from stars unseen, voice of realms beyond mortal ken." The shadow's silver eyes flickered, its form becoming more defined, more individual, as if the naming had granted it greater solidity within her perception. "And I name myself," Lyra declared, standing straighter on that metaphysical crossroads. "Lyra Silverstone Ravenwood, daughter of two bloodlines, queen of Lunarfall, mediator between worlds. In me, these forces find balance. Through me, these realms find voice. With me, these powers find purpose beyond domination or subjugation." Something shifted in the energy surrounding them. A recognition, an acknowledgement, a realignment of forces that had been in opposition since the first pact was sealed. The wolf bowed its great head, not in submission, but in respect for this new arrangement. The shadow inclined its featureless face, silver eyes dimming slightly, as it accepted the parameters of their partnership. In the physical world, Alexander still held Lyra close, his fangs embedded in the juncture of her neck and shoulder. But the pain had transformed, becoming something else, a heat that spread through her body not as agony but as power, as possibility, as transformation. Golden light spiraled up her arms, meeting and merging with threads of silver that seemed to emerge from the very air around them. Where they met, a new energy formed, neither gold nor silver, but a luminous platinum that shimmered with both colors depending on how one perceived it. Alexander withdrew his fangs from her flesh, his eyes wide with wonder as he beheld the changes manifesting in Lyra before him. Her skin seemed to glow from within, illuminated by the energies now flowing through her veins. Her eyes, when she opened them, were no longer purely human. The irises had become rings of gold surrounding pupils of liquid silver, a physical manifestation of the balance she had achieved. "It is done," Elder Gaia whispered, awe evident in her ancient voice. "The true Hyros Gamos. After 300 years it is finally achieved." Lyra slid from the altar to stand on her own feet, testing this new configuration of energies within her. She felt different, expanded, as if her consciousness now existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, perceiving aspects of reality that had always been present but previously invisible to her. The wolf's presence had changed, no longer a separate entity pacing restlessly within her, but an aspect of her own being, lending her its strength, its instincts, its primal connection to the natural world. And the shadow, rather than an invading force, had become another facet of her consciousness, offering perspective beyond human limitations, wisdom gathered from realms no physical being could visit. "How do you feel?" Alexander asked, concern evident in his expression as he steadied her with a hand at her elbow. "Complete," Lyra answered, the word emerging with absolute certainty. "For the first time in my life, truly complete." Another violent tremor shook the ritual chamber, this one strong enough to dislodge dust from the ceiling and cause one of the eternal flames to gutter out entirely. The sounds of battle were no longer distant but immediate. The shadow beasts had breached the palace itself. "We must go," Lord Thornwald urged, moving toward the chamber entrance. "The ritual is complete, but Blackthorn's forces still advance. The kingdom needs its rulers on the battlefield, not hidden beneath the earth." "Yes," Lyra agreed, a new confidence flowing through her movements as she reclaimed her discarded clothing. "It's time to end this conflict, all of it." As they ascended from the ritual chamber to the throne room above, the evidence of battle grew more pronounced. Tapestries hung in tatters, furniture lay overturned and broken, and the bodies of both royal guards and shadow beasts littered the stone floor. The shadow entities had indeed breached the palace defenses, though the sounds of fighting suggested Wolfhaven's defenders still held some ground. They emerged into the great hall to find it transformed into a makeshift command center. Maps were spread across tables, messengers rushed between stations, and wounded warriors were being treated along one wall. At the center of this organized chaos stood General Marcus Blackthorn himself, flanked by a dozen Eastern Territory alphas and the mysterious hooded figure who could only be Lady Eleanor. For a moment, both parties simply stared at each other, equally surprised by the unexpected encounter. Then Blackthorn's face split in a triumphant smile that never reached his cold eyes. "Perfect timing, Your Majesties," he said, his voice carrying easily across the hall. "I was just explaining to your remaining loyal subjects the terms of surrender." Alexander's hand went to his sword, but Lyra laid a restraining touch on his arm. "How did you breach the defenses so quickly?" she asked, her new eyes assessing Blackthorn and his companions with perception that went beyond the physical. What she saw disturbed her deeply. Blackthorn himself glowed with an unnatural energy, threads of silver light coursing just beneath his skin in a pattern that mirrored the shadow entities. Lady Eleanor beside him was worse. Her human form seemed to be merely a shell, a thin veneer covering something that pulsed and writhed with otherworldly power. "We had help," Blackthorn replied, gesturing to the shadow beasts that prowled the perimeter of the hall, their silver eyes fixed hungrily on the defenders. "An alliance of convenience, you might say. An alliance with forces you cannot possibly control," Lord Thornwald warned, stepping forward to stand beside Lyra. "The shadow that walks uses you, General. It always has." Blackthorn's smile turned condescending. Strong words from a man who hid in the northern wilderness for decades, abdicating his responsibilities to the realm. His gaze shifted to Lyra, narrowing as he noticed the changes in her appearance. "I see the vessel has been filled. How tragic that such power should be wasted on one so untested." "Not filled," Lyra corrected, taking a step forward. The platinum light now flowed visibly beneath her skin, brightening as she embraced this new aspect of herself. "Balanced. Something you know nothing about, General Blackthorn." Lady Eleanor moved then, throwing back her hood to reveal a face that might once have been beautiful, but now seemed stretched too tight over her skull, her eyes sunken, yet burning with an inner silver light that matched the shadow entities surrounding them. "The balance is an illusion," she hissed, her voice carrying harmonics that hurt the ear. "True power comes from submission to greater forces, as I have submitted, as the General has begun to submit." "As you have been consumed, you mean," Elder Gaia said sadly. "Oh, Eleanor, what have you done to yourself?" "I have transcended," Lady Eleanor replied, spreading her arms to reveal that her fingers now ended in claws of pure shadow. "I have become more than human, more than werewolf. I have accepted the gift that the shadow offers to those who serve faithfully." Alexander tensed beside Lyra, his hand still on his sword hilt. "This ends now," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of generations of Ravenwood kings. "Blackthorn, your rebellion is over. Surrender, and you may yet be granted mercy." Blackthorn laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the great hall. "Mercy? From a king who cannot even control his own wolf? From a queen who is neither human nor beast, but some unnatural combination of both? I think not." He raised his hand, and the shadow beasts around the hall crouched lower, preparing to spring. "No, Your Majesty. It is you who will surrender to us. The old order ends today. A new age begins, one where the shadow realm and ours exist in permanent connection, where power flows to those with the courage to seize it. You mistake courage for foolishness," Lyra said, power building within her as the balanced forces responded to her will, "and connection for subjugation." She stepped forward, placing herself between Alexander and the advancing shadow beasts. The platinum light beneath her skin brightened, spreading outward to surround her in a nimbus of power that was neither purely light nor purely shadow, but something that partook of both. "I am what you claim to seek," she told Blackthorn and Eleanor. "The bridge between worlds, the living embodiment of the true Hieros Gamos, but I will not be used as a tool for your ambition or the shadow's hunger." "Pretty words," Eleanor sneered, "but words will not save you from what comes." She raised her shadow claws, and as if on signal, the shadow beasts lunged forward, dozens of them converging on Lyra and her companions from all directions. What happened next would be retold in Lunarfall for generations to come. Lyra raised her hands, and from her fingertips erupted not the partial shadow-like claws she had manifested before, but full extensions of platinum energy, talons of balanced power that cut through the approaching shadow beasts as if they were smoke. Where they passed, the entities did not merely disperse temporarily, but dissolved completely, their silver eyes going dark as their essence returned to the realm beyond the veil. Alexander fought at her side, his sword blazing with reflected light from Lyra's power, each stroke banishing shadow beasts with a finality they hadn't achieved in previous encounters. Lord Thornwald's spear of moonlight carved paths through the darkness, while Elder Gaia and Lady Winterbloom maintained a defensive perimeter of blue fire that kept the remaining royal guards safe from the shadow onslaught. But it was Lyra who formed the center of the battle, Lyra whose newfound power turned the tide. As she moved through the great hall, the balanced energies within her responded to each threat instinctively, wolf aspects emerging when physical strength was needed, shadow aspects manifesting when perception beyond the material was required, her human consciousness directing and coordinating the whole. Blackthorn saw his advantage crumbling and made a desperate lunge toward Alexander, drawing a blade that gleamed with unnatural darkness. "If the vessel cannot be controlled, then the bondmate must be eliminated," he snarled, driving the shadow-infused weapon toward the king's heart. Lyra sensed the attack through her expanded awareness and whirled, platinum energy surging from her outstretched hand to intercept the blow. The shadow blade shattered on contact with her power, fragments dissolving into wisps of darkness that dissipated in the air. Blackthorn stared at his empty hand in shock, then at Lyra, his expression shifting from confidence to fear as he fully comprehended what she had become. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "The shadow promised. The shadow lied," Lyra said simply. "As it has lied for centuries, using those who sought to use it, promising power while delivering only destruction." She reached out, not to attack, but to perceive, her new senses examining the threads of shadow energy that had infiltrated Blackthorn's being. They were extensive, but not complete. Unlike Lady Eleanor, he had not fully submitted to the shadow's influence. There remained something of the man, the warrior who had once served Alexander's father with loyalty and distinction. "There is still a choice for you, General," Lyra told him, her voice carrying a compassion that surprised even herself. "Reject the shadow's influence now, while you still can, and you may yet survive this day." Blackthorn hesitated, conflict evident in his expression, as the human part of him warred with the shadow influence. For a moment, it seemed he might indeed choose redemption over destruction. Then Lady Eleanor screamed, a sound of pure rage and frustration that seemed to come from multiple throats simultaneously. Her form rippled, human features melting away to reveal the true entity that had been using her body as a vessel. Not a mere shadow beast, but something older, stronger, more malevolent. "Vessel of balance," it hissed, addressing Lyra directly. "You deny us our rightful domain. You thwart the pact made by your ancestor." "I fulfill the pact as it was meant to be fulfilled," Lyra corrected. "Connection, not conquest. Balance, not domination." "Then you leave us no choice," the entity declared. It reached for Blackthorn with claws of pure darkness, latching onto him before he could retreat. "If we cannot have the vessel of balance, we will take what lesser vessels remain." Blackthorn screamed as shadow energy poured into him in a torrent, overwhelming what remained of his humanity in seconds. His body convulsed, flesh rippling and reforming as the entity merged with him completely, creating a hybrid more substantial than the shadow beasts, but retaining none of Blackthorn's consciousness or identity. What rose before them was a monstrosity, half werewolf, half shadow, with Blackthorn's impressive physical form, now housing an entity of pure malevolence. Its eyes blazed silver, but the pupils had elongated into vertical slits that seemed to swallow light rather than emit it. When it spoke, the voice was Blackthorn's, but layered with the discordant harmonics of the shadow realm. "If we cannot rule through you," it declared, "we will rule through destruction. This realm will burn, and from its ashes a new order will rise, one where the veil between worlds is forever sundered. It lunged for Lyra with impossible speed, shadow claws extended to rend and tear. But Lyra was no longer merely human, no longer limited by physical constraints. The wolf aspect within her granted her enhanced reflexes, while the shadow aspect provided perception beyond normal sight. She sidestepped the attack with fluid grace, platinum energy flowing from her hands to form a shield between the entity and her companions. "Alexander," she called, not taking her eyes from the threat before her. "Lord Thornwald, get everyone out. This battle is mine alone." "I will not leave you," Alexander protested, moving to stand beside her despite the overwhelming power emanating from the shadow hybrid. "Nor I," Thornwald added, his spear of moonlight at the ready. "You are my daughter, regardless of the years lost between us." Lyra shook her head, understanding flowing through her from both wolf and shadow aspects of her new being. "This entity cannot be destroyed by conventional means," she explained rapidly. "It exists partially beyond the veil, anchored to our world only through Blackthorn's corrupted form. I must force it fully into one realm or the other before it can be defeated." "And you can do this?" Alexander asked, trusting her judgment even as concern radiated from him. "I am the bridge between worlds," Lyra replied, certainty filling her voice. "This is what I was born to do." The shadow hybrid lunged again, and this time Lyra met it head-on, platinum energy flowing from her hands to engage directly with the darkness that comprised half its being. Where they connected, reality itself seemed to warp and bend, the boundary between physical and spiritual becoming visibly distorted. "Go!" Lyra commanded, straining against the entity's immense strength. "Get the others to safety." With evident reluctance, Alexander and Thornwald began evacuating the remaining defenders, Elder Gaia and Lady Winterbloom assisting those too injured to walk unaided. The shadow beasts that had filled the hall had either been destroyed in the initial confrontation or had withdrawn to the perimeter, watching with silver eyes as their master engaged with the vessel of balance. Left alone with the shadow hybrid, Lyra focused her full attention on the battle. This was no mere physical contest, but a struggle that spanned multiple planes of existence. Through her shadow aspect, she could perceive the entity's true form extending beyond the physical, reaching into the realm beyond the veil. Through her wolf aspect, she sensed the weaknesses in Blackthorn's corrupted body, the points where shadow and flesh had imperfectly merged. "You cannot win, Vessel," the entity taunted as they grappled in the center of the great hall, energies flaring and crashing around them like lightning. "Even in balance, you are limited by your mortal form. We are ancient, endless, beyond your comprehension." "Perhaps," Lyra acknowledged, allowing her awareness to expand further, drawing on both aspects of her new nature simultaneously. "But I understand something you do not." "And what is that, little queen?" the entity sneered, shadow claws raking across her defensive barrier of platinum energy. "The true purpose of the Hieros Gamos," Lyra replied. "Not conquest, not even coexistence, but transformation." With that declaration, she stopped fighting against the entity's strength and instead redirected it, using principles she somehow understood instinctively, knowledge flowing from the balanced forces within her. Instead of pushing the shadow hybrid away, she pulled it closer, establishing direct contact between her platinum energy and the corrupt merger of Blackthorn's flesh with shadow essence. The entity howled as it recognized her intent, too late to withdraw. Lyra had created not a barrier but a conduit, a direct connection between realms that bypassed the careful restrictions of the original Pact. Through this connection, she could perceive the shadow realm directly, a vast, swirling dimension of energy and consciousness that existed parallel to the physical world, separated by a veil that was never meant to be fully breached. And through this same connection, she could affect that realm directly. "Return to your domain," Lyra commanded, her voice resonating with authority drawn from both bloodlines, from wolf and shadow, from the very essence of the Hieros Gamos itself. "Leave Blackthorn's form. Leave this realm entirely. The pact is fulfilled through me, through balance, not through conquest or destruction." The entity struggled against her command, But the connection Lyra had established worked against it. The more it fought, the more it was drawn back toward its native realm, pulled through the conduit she had created. Blackthorn's corrupted body began to deteriorate as the shadow essence was extracted, flesh returning to its natural state even as the life fled from it. "This changes nothing," the entity hissed, its form becoming increasingly insubstantial as it was drawn back across the veil. "We will return. The hunger for power never dies. Someone will always seek to use us, to break the balance you have established." "Perhaps," Lyra acknowledged, "but they will find me waiting, in this generation and beyond." With a final surge of will, she completed the extraction, forcing the shadow entity fully back into its native realm and sealing the conduit behind it. The remaining shadow beasts throughout the hall shrieked in unison as their connection to their master was severed, their forms dissolving into wisps of darkness that faded into nothingness. In the center of the great hall, General Marcus Blackthorn's body collapsed to the stone floor, empty of both shadow essence and life force. His face in death showed not the malevolence of the entity that had possessed him, but something closer to relief, a final release from the corruption that had consumed him from within. Lyra stood over him, platinum energy still flowing around her hands, though diminishing as the immediate threat receded. She felt a complex mixture of emotions, triumph at the victory, sorrow for Blackthorn's fate, and a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that suggested even her enhanced being had limits. Alexander returned to the hall first, sword still drawn, eyes scanning for threats, before settling on Lyra with evident relief. He crossed to her side in quick strides, reaching her just as her knees buckled with fatigue. "It's done," she told him, as he steadied her with strong hands. "The shadow has been banished back across the veil. Blackthorn is gone. The rebellion ends with him." Alexander glanced at the general's lifeless form, a complex emotion crossing his features. Regret, perhaps, for the loyal warrior Blackthorn had once been before ambition, and shadow corruption had twisted him. "And you?" he asked, his attention returning fully to Lyra. "The balance within you. Does it hold?" Lyra took a moment to assess her internal state, feeling the wolf and shadow aspects of her new being settling into equilibrium with her human consciousness. "Yes," she confirmed, "different, but stable. I am still myself, Alexander, just more." Relief softened his expression. "Good," he said simply, "because Lunar Fall needs its queen, now more than ever." The aftermath of what would come to be called the Shadow War unfolded over subsequent days with surprising rapidity. With Blackthorn dead and the shadow entities banished, the Eastern Territory forces quickly surrendered, most claiming they had been unaware of their leader's true intentions or the shadow corruption that had influenced his actions. Lord Thornwald proved invaluable during this transition, his diplomatic skills and northern forces helping to stabilize the situation, while Alexander and Lyra addressed the deeper implications of what had occurred. The blood pact that had bound the Ravenwood dynasty to the Shadow Realm for 300 years had been fundamentally altered by Lyra's achievement of the true hieros gamos. No longer would vessels be required every 70 years when the blood moon rose. Instead, Lyra served as a permanent bridge between realms, maintaining balance through her unique being rather than through periodic sacrifice. 1 month after the Shadow War's conclusion, the formal ceremony of restoration took place in the Great Hall, now fully repaired and decorated with the banners of all 12 territories. Representatives from each pack gathered to witness as Alexander and Lyra, seated side by side on twin thrones, reaffirmed their commitment to the unified kingdom. "The shadow is banished but not destroyed," Lyra told the assembled alphas, her unusual eyes, gold rings around silver centers, meeting each gaze directly. "It will seek return. It will find those hungry for power, those willing to breach the veil for personal gain. This is why the balance I maintain must be supported by all territories, all packs, all people of Lunar Fall." "And it shall be," Lord Thornwald declared, the first to rise in affirmation. The North pledges itself to the balance and to the crown." One by one, the other territorial representatives made similar pledges, even the Eastern Territory, now led by a distant cousin of Blackthorn's who seemed determined to restore honor to a name tarnished by betrayal. When the formal ceremonies concluded and the guests had withdrawn to the feast that followed, Lyra found herself momentarily alone with Alexander on the balcony overlooking the valley. Twilight painted the landscape in shades of purple and gold, the first stars appearing in the eastern sky. "So," Alexander said after a comfortable silence, "Queen of Lunarfall, mediator between realms, bearer of the Hieros Gamos. Quite a collection of titles for someone who once described herself as just a wolfless omega from a disgraced lineage." Lyra smiled, recognizing the gentle teasing in his tone. "I prefer a simpler title these days," she replied. "Oh? And what would that be?" "Lyra," she said simply. "Just Lyra. To the right people, at least." Alexander turned to face her fully, the setting sun illuminating the silver that had begun to thread through his dark hair. A permanent reminder of the curse he had endured and the price of its resolution. Though his wolf had returned to him after the true Hieros Gamos was achieved, the experience had left its mark on both of them. "And am I among these right people?" he asked, something vulnerable flickering beneath his regal composure. Lyra studied him, seeing him with both human perception and the enhanced awareness granted by her transformed nature. The wolf within her, no longer Alexander's wolf, but an aspect of her own being now, recognized him as kin, as equal, as potential mate in the truest sense. The shadow aspect perceived the complexities of his spirit, the light and dark that existed in balance within him just as they did within her. But it was her human heart that answered, reaching out to take his hand with fingers that no longer manifested platinum claws but remained capable of channeling extraordinary power when needed. "The arrangement was never meant to be permanent," she said, echoing his words from before the final confrontation. "The bond would change, become something different. Remember?" A shadow of uncertainty crossed his features. "I remember." "What you may not know," Lyra continued, moving closer until barely a breath separated them, "is that different doesn't mean lesser. Sometimes it means greater, deeper, more real." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a hope he made no attempt to conceal. "Lyra," he began, but she silenced him with a finger against his lips. "Alexander Ravenwood," she said formally, "King of Lunarfall, Alpha of the Royal Pact, descendant of Alaric the Great. I have a proposition for you." "I'm listening," he replied, his voice roughened by emotion he no longer tried to hide. "The first marriage was arranged for political necessity, magical expediency. It served its purpose." Lyra's eyes held his, gold and silver, meeting warm brown that still flashed gold when emotions ran high. "I propose a second marriage, not arranged but chosen, not for kingdoms or magic or ancient pacts, but for ourselves alone." Alexander's answer came not in words, but in action, arms encircling her waist, lips claiming hers with a passion that had smoldered beneath duty and honor and protocol for longer than either had acknowledged. Lyra responded in kind, the balanced forces within her harmonizing with the surge of purely human emotion that flowed through her. When they finally separated, breathless and laughing like far younger souls, the first stars of evening had fully emerged, watching over Wolfhaven like silent guardians of a new era, an era where shadow and light, wolf and human, past and future, existed not in conflict but in balance, embodied in the unlikeliest of vessels. A once wolfless Omega who had become the bridge between worlds and the beloved queen of a once dying king. The fallen king had risen. The hollow bride had been made whole, and together they faced a future where balance, not power, would be their greatest legacy.